The religion game has generally been played according to the following rules. A theist puts forth an inference from evidence to the conclusion that God exists. Then, a skeptic tries to find fault with the inference or undermine the truth of the evidential claims. The explanation of this pattern may differ from case to case. Anselm and Aquinas sought not to bolster their faith or that of others, but to exhibit connections between the deliverances of faith and the dictates of reason, that faith might become knowledge. In the 20th century, I suspect the reason has been somewhat different. Theistic belief is not intellectually respectable in the way it was in the days of Anselm and Aquinas. In many cases, the game is still played by the same rules, since theists think they have something to prove and non-theists do not seem to disagree. Most think that the burden of proof is on the theist, whereas there is no such corresponding burden on an atheist. One second. I'm going to go to the footnotes. So it looks like this paper has to do with the burden of proof. Proof? You want proof? Okay, so the footnotes are at the end. I hate it when the footnotes are at the end. For account of different ways of theistic arguments have been used, then book, blah, blah, blah. I'm just going to look. Looks like the references are all just, oh, here's one isn't. Okay, so this sucks because all the footnotes, I hate it when all the footnotes are at the bottom of the whole thing. Okay, so we're talking about burden of proof. And he's saying about when Aquinas, thanks for the likes. When Aquinas developed his apologetics, theistic beliefs were respected as intellectual. Where today, it's seen like if you're a Christian, you're seen as like anti-intellectual, anti-science and whatnot, anti-education. I don't think that's true, but that's just how people view religion or religious beliefs, as if they're anti or opposed to science. My task here has two main parts, and then we're talking about the how people, most people think that the burden of proof is on the theist, whereas there's no such corresponding burden on the atheist. So this is what people believe, right? My task here has two main parts. First, I will argue from completely general grounds that there is no special burden of proof that the theist must bear, that the traditional arrangement is arbitrary. Such burdens are context-sensitive matters, and there is no a priori presumption in favor of atheism. Second, I will chart out the difficulties for deductive atheological apologetics. While it seems common and sometimes fashionable to say that one can neither prove nor disprove God's existence, and while there has been extensive literature exhibiting the failings of traditional theistic apologetics, there has been very little done by way of exhibiting the failings of atheism. I will argue that if one takes up the task of providing sound arguments for atheism, formidable difficulties arise. Further, if theism is suspect due to the failings of its apologetics, atheism is suspect due to the failings of its apologetics. How do I know God exists? But the evidence, the objective proof. Welcome, London.
Hey, well, I'd like to say, would you agree that the Bible is misogynistic based on the modern definition of misogyny?
No, I think it's feministic.
Uh, I feel like
What is it? Misanthropic or something? I don't know.
I don't believe it's feministic because it's basically says that no woman should ever teach a man, no woman should ever have power over a man.
Oh, does it?
Um,
Oh, you're just misinterpreting Paul's letter, of course, because you're just doing a plain reading of the text, and you haven't done.
can you explain it to me in
So like Paul's writing. Okay. You have to understand the situation at the time. So
yeah.
Paul was converting pagan cults to Christians, and in a pagan cult, like what are they called? A ceremony, or when they would do their church or their mass or whatever you call it. I don't know what the pagans would call it. Yeah, remember. The women would lead the mass, and they would get up on like in front of the people, and like first of all, they were also like they would incorporate like orgies and stuff. These were orgies, and the women would lead, and they would get up, and they would like speak in tongues and say like gibberish, and it was crazy. So he was just admonishing basically how they run their church. Like they didn't switch to being Christians; they kept their pagan practices, and the women were acting like crazy. And he was just admonishing that, but he also admonishes the men in that same passage. But people ignore that. But actually, but actually, like women, Paul. There's later where Paul talks about women who are in positions to like teach. So he's not saying that women. It's not as there's no like difference between in Christianity. There's no difference between men and women in terms of like one can teach, one can't, one can speak, one. That's just not what it meant. So.
All right. Well, I guess. I mean, I'm gonna be honest with you. I am a Christian. I just wanted that cleared up. So thank you for that. I'm gonna go ahead and follow you.
All right, man. Thanks. All right, man. God bless. Okay, so we're talking about burden of proof in. Oh, someone's requesting. Welcome, Moy.
Hello.
So, do you accept God as your creator?
Not the Christian God.
How old are you?
I'm 15.
No, you have to be 18. Not the Christian God. Are you Hindu? I don't know. It sounded like they were in like a country that wasn't Christian. I don't know which country, but who has the burden of proof in the debate over the existence of God? Antony Flew explicitly claims that theists bear the burden of proof because there's no presumption. Oh, because there is a presumption of atheism. Okay, so Antony Flew says theists have the burden of proof because there's a presumption of atheism. What is it for there to be a presumption against theism? If one means only that one cannot assume the existence of God when trying to prove the existence of God, then surely it is correct to think that in certain contexts there is a presumption against theism. In other contexts, though, there will also be a presumption against atheism when it is being supported by an argument. Flew wants to maintain, however, that the presumption against theism is not context relative in the way I have suggested. Rather, it is non-context relative presumption that warrants what I will call the default strategy for defending atheism, i.e., the presumption has force of providing the framework of an automatic defense of atheism, simply on the condition that there is no good theistic apologetics. If theists cannot win the day, the result is not a standoff. Rather, atheism wins by default. Why might one think that there is a non-context relative presumption against theism? There are at least three reasons. First, one might think that there is something intrinsically suspiciously or unlikely about the position. Second, facts about knowledge and justification might entail that there is a presumption against it. Third, perhaps positive claims have presumptions against them, whereas negative claims do not. I will discuss these in turn. How might some proposition be intrinsically suspicious or second rate? One way is for the proposition to be internally inconsistent. If it is not possible for the proposition to be true, then its intrinsic probability is zero. This, however, is not sufficient for belief in such a proposition to be suspicious. Prior to Gödel's proof of his incompleteness theorems, there was a presumption in the favor of their denials, though their denials are necessarily false. The moral to be learned is that we must be wary of claims that presumptions and burdens are functions of objective features of propositions alone. This was getting kind of wordy. I'm gonna have to chat GBT that. No evidence. We're going over a paper that's talking about the burden of proof. It's funny. So presumptions and burdens are partly determined by the information we have. Of course, if one has proof that something is necessarily false, then one has good reason to think that belief in it is suspicious. But it is not clear how this applies to one who lacks such a proof. I will not pursue these matters here, since if one has a proof that the existence of God is impossible, this obviates the need to defend atheism via some presumption in its favor. However, if it can be shown on some other grounds that the existence of God is intrinsically unlikely, then that would tend to show that one with this knowledge needs some positive justification for properly believing in God. Damn, this one's getting deep. Okay. So, yeah. I'm going to have to spin this through ChatGPT. This is going to be difficult to read. Dang it, Darth, why can't you give me easy reading material? So this passage explores the idea of whether some claims or beliefs, like the existence of God, can be seen as suspicious or unlikely based on their inherent qualities or the information we have about them. Here's a simplified breakdown. 1. When a claim is intrinsically suspicious. A claim is suspicious if it seems unlikely or problematic on its own. For example, if a claim is internally inconsistent, meaning it contradicts itself, then it cannot be true, so its probability of being true is zero. But even if something isn't obviously false, we might still question it depending on the information we have about it. So 2. Gödel's incompleteness theorems. Before Gödel provided his famous theorems, people assumed they were false. Why? Because the evidence and understanding at the time supported their denial. This shows that our judgments about what is likely or unlikely depends partly on what we know given time. So the information we have depending on time will tell us what's likely or unlikely. So that's problematic when saying something is intrinsically suspicious. Presumptions and information. What we assume about a claim, whether it's suspicious or not, isn't just about the claim itself, but also about the information we have. For example, if someone proves that something is impossible, like a square circle, it's reasonable to dismiss it. But for someone who hasn't seen that proof, the claim might not seem suspicious yet. So like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. That, if I guess if like a proof isn't popular, if only a couple people accept a proof or like know about a proof, and other people don't know about the proof, then people will be intrinsically suspicious of a proposition because they don't know the proof, I guess. Yeah, that makes sense. How does this relate to God? If someone could prove that God's existence is impossible, atheism wouldn't need further defense. Everyone would accept that God doesn't exist. But if there's no such proof, the argument shifts. Can it be shown that God's existence is intrinsically unlikely? If so, people who know this would need strong reasons to believe in God anyway. Without such reasons, belief in God might seem unjustified or suspicious. But if there's no wait a minute. If someone could prove that God's existence is impossible, atheism wouldn't need further defense. Everyone would accept that God doesn't exist. But if there's no proof, so if there's no proof that God's impossible, the argument shifts. Can it be shown that God's existence is intrinsically unlikely? If so, people who know this would need strong reasons to believe in God anyway. I'm not sure what this is saying. So if it could be shown that God's existence is intrinsically unlikely, people who know this would need strong reasons to believe in God anyway. Without such reasons, belief in God might seem unjustified or suspicious. In short, whether a claim is suspicious or unlikely depends both on its inherent qualities, like internal consistency, and the information we have about it. Applying this to belief in God, it suggests that proving God's existence is intrinsically unlikely would require believers to justify their faith more strongly. I'm not really sure. Maybe ChatGPT is not really understanding it either. That's what he's saying. Consider contingent propositions. Some might seem less probable than others because it is harder to arrange the world for them to come out true or equivalently God. Equivalently. When we're talking about contingent propositions, some might seem less probable than others because it is harder to arrange the world for them to come out true, or equivalently, it is easier to arrange the world for them to come out false. Okay. This amounts to saying that on contingent propositions, or contingent propositions have prior probabilities on logical information alone, i.e., they have a priori or intrinsic, and they have a priori or intrinsic probabilities. If contingent propositions have intrinsic probabilities, though, such considerations about arranging the world can be based only on logical information. Not any theory we might have about the world. I, for one, do not have any clear sense about how logical truths can furnish any basis for determining which contingent propositions are more likely than others. This may simply be paucity of imagination on my part, so I will not rest my case on it. Let us see if we can find a coherent way to assign intrinsic probabilities to a contingent proposition. But God's not a contingent proposition. Oh, but well, I guess before we prove that, that's still up for debate or something? I'm not sure. This passage is about whether we can determine how likely one statement called contingent propositions are, or some statements called contingent propositions are, based purely on logic without relying on real-world knowledge. Here's simplified explanations. 1. What are contingent propositions? These are statements that could be true or false depending on how the world is. For example, it will rain tomorrow is contingent because it depends on the weather. How could we measure the likelihood of these statements? One idea is that some statements might seem harder to make true than others. For example, arranging the world so that every person on Earth is wearing a red hat right now seems harder than arranging it so that some people are wearing red hats. If it's harder to make a statement true, we might think it less likely, even before we know any facts about the world. Okay. Logical probabilities versus real-world knowledge. This passage asks, can we decide how likely these statements are just from logic without using any knowledge about the real world? For example, can logic tell us if it will rain tomorrow is more or less likely than every person on Earth is wearing a red hat? The challenge. The author says they struggle to see how logic itself could decide this. Logical truths like 1 + 1 = 2 don't seem to help us figure out which contingent statements are more likely to be true. However, they admit this could just be their lack of imagination and open to exploring ways to assign these kinds of probabilities. In short, the passage questions whether we can use pure logic without any real-world facts to figure out how likely certain maybe true, maybe false statements are. It leaves the door open for finding a logical way to do this, but the author is skeptical for now. Okay, so he's saying if we're going to say something is maybe true, maybe false, it's going to depend on like empirics, I guess. It might be natural to think if contingent propositions have intrinsic probabilities, they would all have the same probability value. Perhaps each is as likely to be true as false. This amounts to holding that both A and not A have the value of, 0.5? To see that this suggestion cannot be correct, consider the following series of propositions. So, like premise 1, there are 0 white swans. Premise 2, there is exactly 1 white swan. Premise 2, there are exactly 2 white swans. Or premise 3, there are 2 white swans. Suppose that 0 has an intrinsic probability of 0.5. Its denial is equivalent to the disjunction of the remaining members of the infinite sequence, and it should also have the intrinsic probability of 0.5. However, if the disjunction has this value, each disjunct must have a lower value, since the probability of the disjunction is just the sum of the probabilities of disjuncts. So, if both a contingent proposition and its negation are to have the intrinsic probability of 0.5, not all contingent propositions have the value of 0.5. I'm totally lost in this. If in addition, blah, blah, X, Y, and Z all were to have the intrinsic probability of 0.5, then the disjunction containing exactly them would have a probability of 1.5, which is not allowed by the probability calculus. These difficulties are not peculiar to the particular value of 0.5. Parallel problems arise from any positive assignment. I am totally lost. Okay, maybe ChatGPT can help. Explain this to me like I'm a layman. This passage explores a tricky question. Can we assign equal probabilities to all possible outcomes from certain statements? Let's break it down in simple terms. The idea of being tested. So, imagine trying to assign a likelihood to every possible statement about the number of white swans in the world. For example, the likelihood that, the likelihood there are 0 white swans, the likelihood there's 1 white swan, the likelihood there are 2 white swans, and so on with infinite possibilities. One might think if we don't know anything else, why not just say each of these statements is equally likely? A simple idea, why this seems natural. A simple idea, treat each proposition as 50-50 chance, for example, 0.5 probability. So like the statement, there are 0 white swans gets a 0.5 probability. Its opposite, not 0, meaning there is at least 1 white swan, also gets a 0.5 probability. Why this breaks down. Here's the problem. Saying not 0 is true means that 1, 2, 3, etc. must add up to the same probability as 0, 0.5. But there are infinitely many options of not 0. 1 swan, 2 swan, 3 swans, etc. For their probabilities to add up to 0.5 each, each would have to have a smaller share than 0.5. If we gave each of these options a 0.5 probability, the total would go beyond 1, which is impossible in probability math, since probabilities must add up to 1. The bottom line. The problem shows that we cannot assign the same probability of 50% to every proposition or its opposite. Probabilities for infinitely many outcomes have to shrink so they fit within the rules of probability where everything adds up to 1. Imagine dividing a pizza, probability equals 1, among an infinite number of people, possible outcomes. You can't give each person half the pizza, or you'll need an infinite number of pizzas. Instead, each person has to get a smaller slice. The passage concludes that assigning equal probabilities doesn't work when dealing with infinite possibilities like numbers of swans. All right. I got it now. That actually helped. Sweet. Perhaps logical truths can distinguish among contingent propositions along probabilistically relevant lines so that not all of them have the same intrinsic probability. Richard Swinburne has argued that simplicity is one such property of propositions. Carnap held that propositional content determined intrinsic probability. Simplicity is a notoriously vague notion, and one that does not provide much help here. All necessary truths have the same probability value of 1, yet it is hard to see how they are all equally simple. Surely Gödel's theorems are less simple than an instance of the excluded middle. Yet, on the basis of logical information alone, they have the same probability. Content seems more promising. Carnap held that as the content of or information in a proposition increases, its likelihood decreases. This has an intuitive appeal. The more something says, the more ways there are for it to go wrong. The more something says, the more ways there are for it to go wrong. What? Again, in connection with necessary truths, this does not fit well with the fact that all necessary truths get assigned the value 1. Since they have maximal probability, they should have minimal content. This may be plausible for instances of excluded middle, but not for Gödel's theorems. They tell us a great deal about certain types of structures. Let us suppose that this is just a quirk regarding necessary truths. Okay, I am totally lost in the sauce. My only hope is ChatGPT to understand this. Okay, explain this to me. Man. This passage tackles a complex question. How do we decide the probability of something being true when we're only using logic to guide us? Let's break this down step by step. One, the problem of assigning probabilities to statements. We're trying to figure out if some statements are more likely to be true than others just by looking at their logical structure. For example, a necessary truth is something that must be always true. A number is either even or not even. A contingent proposition might or might not be true. There are 7 planets in the universe. Simplicity as a guide. Philosopher Richard Swinburne suggests that simpler statements might be more likely to be true. For example, the statement there is one swan is simpler than there are 1,056,000 swans. Simplicity could be a way to rank intrinsically probability or different statements. 3. Problems with simplicity. While simplicity seems helpful, it's not clear how to measure it. Some necessary truths, always true statements, don't seem simple at all. For example, Gödel's theorems, deep truths about math, are much more complicated than a basic rule like a thing is either true or false. Yet Gödel's theorems and the simple rule both get a probability of 1 because they're necessarily true. This makes simplicity feel like an incomplete explanation. Okay, that makes sense. Content as a guide. Carnap, another philosopher, suggests that content, how much a statement says, could determine its likelihood. The more detailed or content-rich a statement is, the more ways it could be wrong. For example, there are 1,000,001 swans is more specific than there are swans, so it's less likely to be true. This seems to make sense for contingent propositions, but it causes issues for necessary truths. Gödel's theorems contain a lot of information, yet they are guaranteed to be true. How can something so content-heavy also have the highest probability? The quirk of necessary truths. So this passage ends in suggesting that we may have to treat necessary truths differently. They seem to follow their own rules. Necessary truths always have the highest probability, 1, regardless of their complexity or content. Oh, that's actually pretty interesting, because people always want to go to the simplicity thing. Maybe that's just an oddity of how necessary truths work. Okay, so I'm gonna save that. That could be useful in apologetics. So, for example, Gödel's theorem is more complex than A equals A, but both have equal probability. For example, Gödel's theorem has more content than A equal A, but both have equal probability. That's interesting. That's a pretty good argument. Problems loom, however, if we consider contingent propositions. If the probability of A is zero point 0.5 and that of B is 0.25, the latter should have twice the content as the former. But how do we judge the content of a contingent proposition? We have some rough ideas. It seems clear that general relativity has more content than a law about the boiling point of water at a particular barometric pressure. But do we have anything like a precise enough sense of the difference so that we could say that one is twice as likely as the other? Or suppose we compare the law about water's boiling point with a law about the behavior of tornadoes. Which has more content and thus is less likely? Some concrete suggestions must be made, since applying this intuitive idea to the intrinsic probability of the proposition that God exists requires us to be able to tell whether its value is less than 50%. Bro, I should just have like every freaking paragraph I'm gonna put into ChatGPT because it's kind of dense. Explain this to a layman. This passage explores the challenges of assigning probabilities to contingent propositions based on how much content they carry. Here's a simple breakdown. The idea of content in statements. The idea that statements with more content are harder to make true because they're more detailed, so they should have lower probabilities. For example, simpler statements, it will rain tomorrow, less content, easier to make true. Complex statement, it will rain tomorrow in Paris from 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. and stop exactly at 4:01 p.m. More content, harder to make true. The problem, how do we measure content? We understand intuitively that some statements are more detailed than others. General relativity, a theory explaining gravity, clearly has more content than water boils at 100 degrees Celsius at sea level. But how do we quantify the difference in one statement? Is one statement twice as content heavy or 10 times? There's no clear way to measure this. 3. Content versus probability. If we assign probabilities based on content, a simpler statement, water boils at 100 degrees Celsius, might get a higher probability. A more detailed statement, tornadoes always form under these exact conditions, would get a lower probability. But without a precise method to compare the content, these probabilities become guesswork. What about God's existence? So this passage hints at applying this idea to the proposition God exists to judge its intrinsic probability, likelihood based on logic alone. We need to know how much content the statement has and whether it's simple or complex compared to other propositions. But if we can't measure content precisely, we can't confidently assign a probability to it. So imagine you're building puzzles. A simple puzzle with just 10 pieces is easier to complete, more probable than a complex one with 1,000 pieces, less probable. But if someone hands you 2 puzzles without telling you how many pieces each has, you'd struggle to compare their difficulty. Similarly, without a clear way to measure content, we can't confidently say which statements are more or less likely true. I like that one. Beyond these vagaries, there are more concrete difficulties. Consider again the series of propositions above. The members of the series are mutually exclusive and jointly exhaustive. They seem to be equally simple and equal in content, so they should have some intrinsic probability. What value should they have? What series of propositions is he talking about? The swans. Zero is the only possible answer. For any positive real value, there is a finite disjunction of the members of the series that would have an intrinsic probability greater than 1. So they cannot all have the same positive real value. But if we say that each has a value of 0, another unsavory consequences ensue. If 0 has an intrinsic probability of 0, then it follows that the probability of that there's at least one white swan has the value of 1. Eh? Oh, I missed the freaking... Oh, I missed the footnote. Let's see here, what page am I on? 3. I wanted to read that footnote. 6, the footnote. Unless, of course, there's a good reason to connect simplicity with truth, I know of no such reason, and many find such a connection doubtful, as illustrated by the scientific anti-realist skepticism regarding the usefulness of simplicity as a realist constraint on theory choice. This may be summed up as there may be good reasons for thinking that theories should be simple, but there are no good reasons for thinking the realist world is. Oh, so there may be good reasons for thinking theories should be simple, but there are no good reasons for thinking the real world is simple. Page 3, I think. Yeah. I'm just gonna put it in the chat GPT. Maybe it'd be just easier to put all this shit in the chat GPT than trying to like read it when I'm like, there what? No intelligent, mature atheists want to challenge the might of the Christian worldview? Battery. We're talking about philosophy. Answers in Genesis. Why is knowledge of a metaphysical absolute necessary for intelligibility? Because like There'd basically be no like metaphysical context to anything you say. You wouldn't be able to know the world as it actually is. So you would just be talking about your life would become a fantasy. Like the only Christians can be realists because only Christians could really make metaphysical claims with like ultimate context. Like secular philosophers, they speculate and guess about metaphysics, but they have no way to, apart from God revealing knowledge to us, you would have no way to justify any like claim about reality. But you talk about reality. So since you can't really make sense of reality with human reasoning or science, that we need God to make sense of reality. That's kind of the issue you're in. You need knowledge from God. But due to like human limitations, basically. If God exists, we wouldn't have to be debating it. I mean, people debate flat Earth, so the Earth is obviously a sphere, but people still debate it. Just because something's obviously true, it's not going to follow that it wouldn't be debated. I know Jay Dyer, yeah. This passage continues to explore the problem of assigning intrinsic probabilities, likelihoods based on logic alone, to a series of related propositions. Let's break it down simply. Who can demonstrate the creation of man? God. Oh, really? So I take it you're Eastern Orthodox then? Thanks, science, math, and things. Why do you need to justify it if you can't see it? This is like a metaphysical unmoved mover argument. What? To even make an argument, you have to have metaphysics. You couldn't even argue without metaphysics. So, to deny God's revelation is to deny that which would ground arguments. So, only Christians can really argue. Okay, so recap of the series of propositions. We're looking at a series of mutually exclusive and exhaustive statements about white swans. It's like a set, of propositions. Like, there are 0 white swans. There's exactly 1 white swan. There are 2 white swans. There are 3 white swans. No, an infinite set, right, of propositions about how many white swans exist. These statements cover all possibilities, and only one of them can be true. The challenge of equal probabilities. So say, if all these propositions have the same probability, we hit a problem. Adding up their probabilities, since they're mutually exclusive, must equal 1. But there are infinitely many possibilities. If each has a positive probability, like 0.001, their sum would become infinite, which doesn't make sense because probabilities can't exceed 1. So the only way for the probabilities not to add up infinitely is for each proposition to have a probability of 0. But then if everything is probability of 0, then none of them are true, right? And one of them has to be true, which must be the case since they cover all possibilities and it would still be 1. So this is a contradiction. How can each individual proposition have a probability of 0, but the total certainty of that one of them is true equals 1? It suggests that the probability system is breaking down when applied this way. For the at least and white swans problem. This passage then points out another strange result. The probability there are at least X number of white swans when where x is any number you pick would also end up being 1. What? This means every time you raise the bar, like asking if there are at least 10, 100, or 1,000 swans, the probability still says 100% true. Clearly that's wrong because we know there's uncertainty about how many swans exist. I don't really get that. So imagine you're rolling a die with infinite sides where each side corresponds to the number of swans. If you assign an equal chance to each side, the total probability becomes infinite, which doesn't work. If you assign a 0 chance to each side, you somehow still know the die will land on one of its infinite sides, but how can all sides have a 0 chance? This shows the difficulty of applying intrinsic probabilities to infinite sets of possibilities. The system gives results. Oh, is this saying that we can't? I think he's leading to say that we can't assign a probability to God because God is like an infinite mind. Would God be like an infinite set or something? God would contain an infinite set of possibilities because God would contain like all numbers, for example. I think that's where he's going with this. That's why we have to do tag, because we have to go argue that God's necessary. We can't argue that God's probable. You don't believe in God? Oh my goodness. But why would you not believe in what's objectively proven and cannot be denied rationally? It's weird. It's weird people like want to irrationally deny God, but okay. What is the proof? So God is proven like as a model of reality, right? So to say something's like true or false, it requires like a model of reality. To talk about reality at all, I guess, requires a model of reality. And so the only like the atheist model of reality, or like a model of reality that doesn't affirm a creator creature distinction, it entails a performative contradiction. So only the Christian model of reality can explain our experience. So to deny the Christian model of reality would be like to deny experience. So that's how we prove. That's how we would prove God. God has revealed himself as like a model of reality that makes sense, and the denial of that leads to absurdity. Yeah, God. But you can't say gods are imaginary, because if you say God is imaginary, then your life is an imaginary, because only like you'd be basically you'd be stuck in the matrix, like the Bible's the red pill to get out of the matrix into the real world. So if you deny God's revelation, you're in your life is a fantasy. Yeah, you say God's imaginary, but your life is imaginary without God. So, Mars, what are the epistemology books that you have read? I've read like papers about epistemology. I'm not really like an expert on epistemology. I guess the book The Objective Proof for Christianity went over epistemology at like I would say like a remedial level. I'm not really that good at philosophy or anything. But that's the thing, to debate atheists, you don't really have to know anything, since atheism is completely like an untenable position, or agnosticism. Welcome, Lil Crimmy.
Hey yo, what's up, man?
So,
No, so you're saying, right, that if you don't believe in God, then your life is not real.
yeah.
Life is like a fantasy. So like if someone that is an atheist or agnostic, right, goes and kills all of your family, he's not real, you know? Like your family can't be dead because someone that's not real killed them.
You have to say unalive. You can't say that word.
Oh shit, I'm sorry, unalive. Whatever. Like
Yeah, like it'd be so like have you seen the movie The Matrix?
I've seen the movie The Matrix. Yes, it's a movie. Yeah, I've seen that.
Before he takes the red pill, his life is a fantasy, right? Because he thinks he's in the real world, but he's actually in a simulation. So that's like a fantasy life, right? I'm just
Right.
saying that's what atheists. You wouldn't know you're in a real world, based on like science can't tell you the world is real, and like philosophers can't tell you the world is real. So you would have no idea. Like you could be in a simulation unless God gives you knowledge, unless God tells you, hey, you're not in a simulation, you're in this world that I designed. And so to deny that knowledge from God is to like put yourself in the fake fantasy world.
No, you can't. Like that's by saying that that's what your mind saying because God is real. Then that's how it is. Like that makes no sense. Like you're going on the basis that God is real before you can even say that.
No, you don't understand. So there's like the two ways humans get knowledge is we get knowledge through like what we observe. We observe the world, that gives us type of knowledge, and we get knowledge through logic or reason. That's another type of knowledge. But that isn't sufficient to say like we're not in the Matrix. So you could never, your whole life could be a fantasy in the Matrix, and you like science could never tell you otherwise. You see what I'm saying? The only way you can know that you're not.
Like you're making something up to prove your point.
I'm not making anything up. What are you?
What? You're saying that we live in the Matrix all of a sudden. Like, where does that come from? Where does it say in the Bible that we live in a Matrix? And where does it say? Where does any science say we live in the Matrix? What are you talking about?
I'm talking about reality. If we're gonna talk about reality, we have to be able to like, know what reality is. You know, see what I'm saying? Would it make sense to me to talk about reality if I don't know what reality is?
I mean, to an extent, like we don't know everything about reality, but we know a lot about reality. We don't need to know all about reality. That's a whole different thing.
Don't know anything about reality without God. That's the point. God,
I don't need God to know something about reality.
You're in a fantasy. Of course you do.
I know I need to breathe to stay alive. I know I need to eat and drink. I know I need my relations to stay happy. Like I know a lot of things. I don't need to know whether or not the world came to be in a certain way or not. Then I definitely think that we have enough proof that it wasn't just built like it was in the Bible.
Is the food you eat like a computer program, like a simulation, or is it actual like physical food?
It's actual physical food.
But you don't know that. You just have blind faith.
Yes, I do know that.
There's no scientific evidence for that. You're a liar.
Well, what do you mean? What do you mean? I have? Well,
there's no scientific evidence. The food you eat is physical. It could be a computer program.
Yes, there is scientific evidence, but then you just say that scientific evidence is just not real.
Okay, so did you just come up here to lie?
I'm not lying to nobody.
What scientific evidence is there that you're not in the Matrix? What experiment proves that you're not in the Matrix?
I mean, nothing 100% proves you anything, but then nothing
you could be eating computer programs instead of physical food.
You could be a lot of things, though.
You have admit it. Admit you don't know.
No, I know I don't know. I know I don't know.
Okay, that's a problem. You're in a fantasy. That's what I'm saying.
You don't know nothing either, bro.
You can escape. No, I know because God. I'm saying
But you don't
God,
know.
I
How do
got
you know?
knowledge from God
How do you know?
because God determines what's true, and God gives me
But
knowledge
how do you know?
because it comes from God.
But how do you know?
You can't deny it. You can't rationally
I'm
deny
asking
it.
you a question. How do you know it comes from
Yeah,
God? How do you
I'm
know?
explaining it to you, right?
You're
To
not.
escape the matrix, you have to accept God's revelation.
Right. How do you know? How do you know that anything comes from God?
Because if you deny it, then you couldn't explain, your experience would be unintelligible. You can't
But you're
deny
not explaining.
revelation.
That's fine. You're not
The
explaining
necessary
how it
truth.
comes from God.
It's a
That's
how
nothing,
well
bro.
God can just like talk to us directly, or I mean, just the way He designed everything reveals His mind. So
Bro,
literally,
you can't just be like, oh, if you're saying that God is doesn't exist, then the only other possible thing is that we live in a matrix. Like that's just not like that. Like you again, like you are making something up that's just not the truth.
no, I'm not making anything up.
Yeah,
It
you're
is the
making
truth.
something up to justify God, which is whatever you want.
No, it's just going to be either the case that knowledge comes from our observations and our reason, or that there's this like third option where we get knowledge from God. And that you cannot rationally deny that we get knowledge from God, because if you do, that would lead to an absurdity where our experience would become unintelligible.
Of course, I can't deny it because I've never gotten anything from God. I've never gotten none of my knowledge from God. So I can easily say that.
You can irrationally deny it. Yeah, you can emotionally deny it.
No, I
Yeah,
can very rationally deny it, and you
okay,
can emotionally think that there's a God because you want to believe that after you die you go somewhere.
so what's your rationale for denying God and His revelation?
That I have never needed Him. I have never needed to believe it to experience the exact same things that you experience.
Well, you're just
That is
ignoring
my
the
rationale.
evidence. So I'm not really interested in talking to people who are emotional. So I'm gonna move on.
What are you talking about? There's no. So
You're
because I
ignoring
have
the
another
evidence.
opinion than you,
You're
because
ignoring.
I haven't.
You believe what you want to be true, your emotions, rather than what the
No,
evidence.
no.
Yeah.
You're the one that believes what you want to believe. I am the one that says in the end I don't know. I
No,
don't know what's
you're
true
just
or
lying.
not,
Okay,
but I'm not gonna
you're just
claim.
ignoring the evidence. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna look to talk to
Right.
people who want to be
Okay.
rational. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, that's right.
I
That's what I
wish you
thought.
well. I wish
That
you
type of
well.
guy. Yeah.
Well, I
That's
mean, you're
good.
ignoring. You're being. I mean, if you're, I can't talk to an irrational person. You're being completely emotional.
You haven't given any evidence. You just said God is
Exactly.
here because He is.
I've
You
given
haven't
plenty
said
of
given any
evidence. Okay,
evidence.
whatever, man. I wish you well. He just wants to ignore me. Oh, what's up, Boolean?
Nothing much, man. How about yourself?
Yeah, I was just studying this paper that Darth gave me, but it's like pretty dense, so it's kind of struggling through it.
What paper is it?
It's called Atheological Apologetics. It has to do with the burden of proof. About how most people think the burden of proof is on the theist, and there's no corresponding burden on the atheist. But it's like trying to prove or make an argument that that's not the case. And it's like,
I mean, yeah, there is a burden of proof if you're denying the existence of God, and we can prove that rejecting God's necessity is denying His existence. So,
yes, exactly. I'm not sure. I haven't gotten to the end of the paper. He's talking about, what is he talking about here? Like he's talking about this problem about assigning probabilities to an infinite set. Or like if you had a set of like, there are 0 white swans, there are 1 white swan, there are 2 white swans, there are 3 white swans. So like it covers infinitely,
an infinite set of propositions is all it's saying.
Right. So one of them is true, right? Because there is a set number of like white swans that exist on Earth or whatever, right? But you couldn't, if you assigned any probability to like this, the propositions in the set. So like the way they would do it is You have to. I don't know how to explain this. If you assign a probability, they would assign like equal probabilities to all members of the set. I guess that's how they would do it, because there's this like idea that everything's like 50-50 or equally likely or something. So
They're
like,
equally valid.
if you assign any probability to all the members of the set, since there's an infinite amount, the probability will exceed 1, which will be a contradiction.
Yep.
But then if you assign the probability of 0 to all the members of the set, then the probability will equal 0. Another contradiction, because we know that one of the members of the set has to be true. So there's this like, basically he's saying it's impossible to assign a probability to like an infinite set. That's where I got so far in the paper. But anyways, let's see if we can get some. Do you want to precept, Julian? You're welcome.
Nah, man, I don't wanna outshine you. You can go ahead.
Welcome, Mr. Error.
Hi, do you have to be 18?
Yes, you do. You definitely do. Yeah, sorry.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm not here to debate, but I have some questions.
You can ask in the chat, I think, but I can't have you on the panel. It's a TikTok rules. Well, you said, why should I believe? I see you ask in the chat, why should I believe in God? So the Christian God would be objectively proven in a transcendental argument for God, where we can show that like God is necessary for like logic, for example. God would ground logic. If you deny God, you wouldn't be able to ground logic on a godless worldview. So since God's necessary for logic, then denying God would be like denying logic. Or I could show that God's necessary to make science possible, for example, because science is going to require like logic for one, conceptual consistency, and it also is going to require the like a physical consistency. You need to have like a regularity of nature, uniformity of nature to do science experiments. Yeah. So we can just show like how God is basically necessary for all these things like science and philosophy. We couldn't do science and philosophy without God, essentially. So that's why you should believe in God, because it's only irrational. It's the only way to be rational or to be a realist. Otherwise, your life is like a fantasy. Basically, you're in the Matrix. Welcome, the great Gambini.
Rambini, hey, what's up?
Yo, just proving God. So do you accept God as your creator?
I do not accept God.
So I claim you can't rationally deny God. Do you accept that?
I mean, I deny everything that cannot be affirmed. So it's your job. It's your job to affirm God. Okay. And by default, your inability to affirm God, I just don't have God in my model of the world because it doesn't have any predictive or explanatory power. Okay.
So would you agree with me that you can't rationally deny God then? Sounds like you agree.
Well, what do you mean by I can't. I don't invoke God. The same way that I don't invoke unicorns.
Why does it not have explanatory power? That's a very, very bold assumption.
Well, it's true. The best models that we have don't include a God.
What? Do you know what explanatory power is?
I do, absolutely.
What is it?
It's the ability to predict.
It's not just that. It's the ability to explain history. You don't think the Bible explains history?
That's predicting.
Well, I think
that's predicting the present given the past.
I think that's a valid answer. I'd say the ability to.
It is formally, that is the formal definition.
That's correct.
Mathematically.
But I would argue that like the scriptures have an abundant amount of explanatory power. Well, your worldview doesn't have access to the past. Otherwise, you would have existed.
The scriptures. I mean, I've read the scriptures, so I'm familiar with them. But there's there's no reason for me to believe that the scriptures are the words of an omnipotent being or influenced.
But they do have
by
explanatory power, though, don't they?
Well, so does Harry Potter.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't have as
Sure
much
it does.
explanatory power as like the scriptures would.
No, because like Newton's
Potter
laws,
doesn't mention
Newton's laws
actual
have
places.
explanatory power. Like I can use Newton's laws to predict the path of a projectile. We use Newton's laws to navigate to the moon.
Okay,
We can
but
predict
Newton's
where
laws
when
assume
eclipses
many
will
different
occur.
types of presuppositions, don't they?
What's that? I missed
So
that.
PMARS's argument is basically that in order to do science, in order to do these predictions, you have to have presuppositions behind the statements that you're making, right? That could be induction,
absolutely, of
logic,
course.
self,
We have to
time.
assume. We make assumptions, but those assumptions are justified by the predictive and explanatory power they
But
provide.
the results are also assumed. You're assuming that you have access to the external world, right?
No,
Which kind of-
that's
kind of in
just
question.
included. I don't assume that. It's just part of the model. The model gives me predictive power.
Yeah, the model just tells you and assumes that you're a part of the external world. You can't justify that.
I can justify it because it works. The device you're reading this on was
So
constructed.
utilitarianism, which also assumes like the things in question.
Hold on. Let me explain. The
Justifies your
device,
worldview?
the device that you're listening to right now was constructed by following these principles. It works. That's the justification, is that it actually works. Like I can predict
Okay,
the future.
eugenics works. Do we ought to do that thing?
What's
Yeah,
that?
just to say something works is not a justification, actually.
Right.
That is. It gives us predictive
No,
power.
it's not.
That is how you justify invoking something.
That's
It's
incorrect.
because it literally.
Because it has to say works. There's be a normative claim there. So now you're gonna have
No,
to.
it's not normative. It's objective.
It's absolute. You're a liar. It's absolutely normative.
It's objective. Newton's laws.
tell you why.
Newton's laws tell me where the
One
position
second. So,
of comets and asteroids will be. They tell me
when we speak
eclipses
about
will
what works, how do you differentiate between what
be.
doesn't work
I
and
make
what
a
works?
prediction and it comes true, and I verify.
No. Can you answer my question? How do you differentiate between what works and what doesn't work?
I make a prediction.
Okay, that's assuming
example,
induction. Go ahead.
Halley's comet will return in 70 years at a
Assuming
particular
the laws of
location.
logic.
What?
That's assuming the laws of logic. That's assuming induction.
What? No.
All right?
Okay.
You
This
wouldn't
is
be
a
able to-
common.
you wouldn't be able
this,
to
no, hold
account-
on. It's very clear to me that you have not studied logic, because you say
haven't
the
studied
laws of logic, but
epistemology. You don't even know what you're
there
talking
is
about.
no logic. There are infinitely many logics.
You're using an inference rule, right?
Hold on. Which logic are you talking about? Are you talking about
I'm talking
first
about
order
the
logic?
classical laws
Are you
of
talking
logic,
about
excluding
second
law of
order
affinity, law
logic?
of exclusion,
Are you
law
talking
of
about
contradiction.
propositional logic? Are you talking about intuitionistic logic?
I told you what
Are
I'm
you
talking
talking
about. I told you
about
what I'm talking
higher
about.
order logics like set theory and type theory? Are you talking about modal logic or temporal logic? There are infinitely many logics. You cannot say logic as if it's one thing, and every single one of these
No,
logics.
all you're saying is there's an infinite amount of ways to express logic, but that's
these are
that
different
doesn't-
logics.
No, they're
all
not.
different systems.
The only different
It's
quote
just
unquote
soft.
logics you could refer to is like fuzzy logic or something like that.
No,
that's about it.
that's its own
Yes.
logic. That's one of infinitely many.
Oh my god, this is so
Which-
stupid.
Seriously, which logic?
Yeah,
Which logic
I
are you
told you
talking
which
about?
logic. I'm referring to the classical laws of logic, which
But they
includes
all have
the
different
law of
axioms.
identity.
Yeah, the
law of
classical is just
exclusion,
first
and the
order
law of
logic.
non-contradiction.
But why do you justify why do you hold that on a pedestal, and how do you justify that over second order logic?
How do I
which is more
justify that
powerful?
over other logic? All you're asking is how do I justify that over other expressions of the very same thing
No.
that we're talking about?
No, they're not the same. They're very different. They have completely
They're
different
different in the way that
expressive
they're
powers and
expressed.
capabilities.
What are you talking about?
They have completely different
This is
axioms.
sophistry, dude. This is sophistry.
What are you talking about? This is just a fact. You
Being
can
a
go look.
sophist.
You can go look at all of. There's a whole list on Wikipedia of all the different logics. I've studied many of them.
Yeah, but
Like,
you're
like,
using
for example,
the law of identity
for
right
example,
now, right?
intuitionistic logic.
As I
it
said, you're
excludes
using the
it
law
does
of
not have the law of
identity right
excluded
now,
middle.
are you not?
I can't hear you.
You're using the law of identity right now, are you not?
Schrodinger's logic doesn't have the law of identity is the same. It excludes it. For every law, for every axiom that you think is fundamental, there is a logic that excludes it. There's even paraconsistent
Oh yeah,
logic.
I'm sure there is. I'm
Yeah,
sure
there
there
are.
is, dude.
There's paraconsistent
I'm
logic.
sure they're not
that
self-refuting
even
as well.
exclude
I'm
the
sure
law
of
of
it.
non-contradiction. And then there's the law of
I'm
excluded
sure they're
middle,
not
which is excluded
self-refuting.
in intuitionistic logic.
I'm
So-
sure they're not.
Again,
Any of the
logics
axioms would be
are
assuming them to be the
created
case
by
in order to exclude
humans.
them.
They're
How could
cognitive
you exclude
constructs.
something?
We created them to help us reason about the world. They're not fundamental. They help us reason. That's it.
Logic is a necessary truth. It can't be constructed and contingent upon humans.
No,
what are you
it's not
talking
necessary. The logic,
Yes, logic is.
no,
it's across
not
all
necessary.
possible worlds.
Logic
You can't
points at
conceive of a
things.
possible world without the laws of logic, dude.
No, because the laws of logic were created by
Power mind
humans.
think.
And furthermore, there are no laws of logic. There are infinitely many. Which logic? Every logic has its own laws.
There are no. What is no? Can you tell me what no is?
There are no
is no
laws.
identical
There
to
are
itself?
no laws of logic. Every logic has its own
Is
laws.
no identical to itself? What does
Every
no mean?
logic has its own laws. Which logic are you talking about when you say the laws of logic?
Well, you didn't answer the question. What does no mean?
What does no mean?
Yeah, is no identical to itself? How is it not identical to yes?
Well,
Or how is it not identical to some other word?
we can presuppose a logic that has the law of identity.
Now we're going to presuppose classical logic, right?
Yes, and we do that because it helps us reason about the world, but it's not
So
fundamental.
in order to deny classical logic, you have to assume classical logic.
I can assert
Yes,
I can assert other
logic.
logics.
That's literally what you just did.
No, that's just consensus. I can assert any logic.
Mars. I don't even want to engage with this guy anymore. He's
That's
so
because
fallacious.
come on, dude, give me a break.
Come on, bro.
So the point is,
Anyways, can we just cut all
invoking
this
God,
sophism?
invoking God doesn't get you anything.
Can we just cut all the sophism?
I'm looking for an
Why do you
argument
think-
here, dude.
Okay, do you understand the transcendental argument? Why do you think we invoke God?
We're not
Well,
doing 2 and 1.
I understand every argument because you can show me a valid argument. But do you understand the difference between a valid argument and a sound argument?
Yes, I know the difference, dude. I took
Okay.
philosophy class. I have a
Great.
formal education.
What's the difference? Let me hear it.
Valid argument refers to an argument structure or the rule of inference, something like modus ponens, modus tollens. The soundness refers to
Well,
the
that's not
actual
quite
content
accurate.
of the propositions in the syllogism. So just saying that I don't know what I'm talking about.
Hold on. This is important. The distinction is essential. A valid argument is an argument where if all the premises are true, then it has been shown that the conclusion must be true.
Yes,
Right?
I'm aware. Yeah, dude.
Okay,
Wow,
I'm
that's
just
so good.
okay, that's
Yeah,
a valid
man.
argument. Valid arguments are trivial. Right?
I'm not just presenting a valid argument. It's a sound argument is a claim.
Exactly. A valid argument, people propose them all the time. Right?
I know people propose you can make a valid argument for anything that's not sound,
Yes.
but the argument
Excellent.
is not I'm making that it's sound. Do
Okay.
you
So how do
understand
we
that
determine whether
I'm not
something
just
is
claiming
sound?
here's a valid syllogism. I can argue for anything now. I'm saying there's a valid syllogism with content behind its premises that are very, very sound.
Okay,
And I
but
can
how
argue
do
for it.
we
That's
determine?
the entire argument.
Hold on. I'm in agreement here. I just want to make sure we understand what validity is and what soundness is, and
Yes, I do.
How do
Okay,
we
I have
determine
formal
if an
education
argument
in
is
this.
sound? How do we determine if an argument is sound? And first of all,
We
what is
determine an argument is sound by its justification.
by its just?
For example, what is the justification for premise 1? What is the justification for premise 2? The most sound type of arguments
What's a
would be something like a
justification?
reductive.
What's a justification?
A justification is a good enough reason to believe in something.
And what's a good enough reason?
A good enough reason would be like something that's not excluding laws of logic or doesn't like lead to a contradiction.
Which law? Come on. Which laws? We're going in circles here. The laws of logic.
I named you 3 laws that I appealed to earlier. So like a good reason would be a reason that doesn't have a contradiction and can be further demonstrated by other
validity.
evidences.
That's just validity, though. That's just validity.
That's
Validity is not good
validity.
reason.
Okay, begging the question is an informal fallacy. So you can have a good reason without being fallacious or having a contradiction within your own statement. So my argument is that the soundness would just be a good enough reason or a good enough evidence and a good enough justification to argue for each of the premises which would prove that it's sound. For example, I can even provide.
Well, you
further
can't prove
solutions
that it's
to
sound.
provide
You
its
cannot prove.
soundness.
Hold on. I mean, you were speaking earlier. You were talking about the Matrix, right? And you made a point I agree with.
That was me.
Oh, okay. So the conversation was about the Matrix, right? We cannot prove that we
Science
don't live in
and
the
philosophy
Matrix.
can't justify any metaphysical claims.
Well, yeah, we can't prove things. We're epistemically, it's impossible. There's no certainty.
Are you an epistemic nihilist?
You can't.
No,
debate them.
I'm just there's no certainty.
Yeah, it sounds like
It's not about
Proof only
certainty.
exists in formal systems like math and logic. But
It's not about certainty. It's about the metaphysical content of any sentence you utter. You can't even speak about reality in an intelligible way. There's no reality. You have no idea what reality is. That's
sure. I mean, we don't. When you say no, what I assume you mean is we don't know for certain. We can come up with ideas, right?
No. You can't make claims about reality at all.
We can make claims.
Not baseless claims. I'm saying you can't make any justified claim about reality.
We can make well.
It has
We
nothing
can
to
make.
Do with certainty.
Hold on. I mean, Are you familiar with fallibilism?
Yeah, I'm familiar with fallibilism. That doesn't matter, right? Because
fallibilism,
it doesn't matter, dude. It doesn't matter. You're stuck on certainty. You're like,
Listen.
like you're stuck.
No,
dude,
well, this is an important principle.
Hold on.
I mean,
Stop. Nothing to do with certainty. Irrelevant. The idea is, does your sentence actually connect to real world objects?
But that's a binary claim. You can't be certain.
To the real world object.
Okay, everything is in my worldview. Every epistemic claim about the world is probabilistic. There's no certainty. We cannot be certain about anything we observe.
Okay, hold on.
There's just more probable and less probable, and that's it.
There's no your worldview to speak of. Okay, do you not get this?
Well, of course there is. I have my own worldview.
You don't get. But your world, it's a contradiction. It's
my
false. It's a performative contradiction.
Okay, but
what?
Dude, I don't understand what you're trying to argue here. You're just saying everything is nothing and nothing is anything.
To debate requires metaphysical claims. You're showing up to the debate. We can only know metaphysical claims through God's revelation.
We cannot know anything for certain.
You must be a fucking Christian to even show up to the debate. Because you can't debate on your godless model of reality since you couldn't make any metaphysical claims necessary to debate.
Dude, you got to connect that. You can't connect that. Nothing. That is a non sequitur. Absolutely
not a
nothing
non sequitur. How do you ground the ability to argue? How do you ground logic, for example, on your godless worldview?
I told you. We make assumptions and then the predictive and explanatory. Dude, stop interrupting me. Stop interrupting me while I'm explaining. I'm answering your question.
You're not answering my
I'm answering your question. Let me answer your fucking question.
I'm going to kick you if you don't answer my question.
You keep interrupting me.
Stop. I'm going to teach you, okay?
You're not.
Stop.
You're
going to teach you. Stop.
Oh my God, dude. You can't listen to anybody but yourself.
I'm going to kick you. Stop. When we're talking about a grounding relationship, right?
Are you going to let me answer?
No.
Then why don't you just talk to yourself? Why do you invite people on if you don't let them answer?
Okay, well, have a nice day. Thank you for coming.
Why don't you let me answer?
Because you're BSing.
You won't let me answer. You don't even know what my question. You won't even let me explain anything.
Dude, you're bullshitting.
No.
Yes.
Dude,
I don't want to hear you bullshit. I'm not interested in bullshit.
You don't want to hear anybody but yourself.
You're not answering my fucking question.
You won't let me answer.
You're not
How am I supposed to answer a question when I get five words in and then you interrupt?
Just ridiculous. What a sophist. There we go. Sophism.
The guy was a sophist. I mean, he admitted earlier that he caught himself in a contradiction, but in order to like basically get away from that topic, he just wanted to go on to like soundness and validity. Like, we need to go to the basics here between a sound argument and a valid argument, thinking that I don't know what the fuck that means.
Yeah, he was bullshitting. So, I mean, he kept going about, oh, what about fallibilism, certainty? It shows that like he's just totally lost in the sauce. No fucking clue what's going on in the conversation. It's like I might as well be talking to a fucking wall. It's like, what the fuck? The hell's wrong with these people?
But fallibilism,
Fallibilism. Nothing to do with that. Good God. You can't even talk about reality, dude. You don't. Is reality a mental substance or a physical substance? If you can't answer that question, then how can truth correspond to reality if you don't even know what reality is? That's the problem, dude. We need God to tell us what reality is. We can't make any metaphysical claims without revelation. Kant admits this, the noumenal phenomenal divide, right? Which is a contradiction to even say we can't make metaphysical claims is a metaphysical claim. But it's the truth. I mean, they couldn't make a justified metaphysical claim.
Well, he was like, I can follow any laws of logic I want to. I can deny the law of identity. But when he said there are no laws of logic, I asked him if the word no is identical to itself. And he literally admitted that yes, it was, and that he presupposes classical logic, which was in question. So he caught himself in a contradiction, and when I caught him in a contradiction, he wanted to move on to another topic. He wanted to prevaricate and obfuscate to like soundness and validity, which I don't even know why he covered that. There's no reason why that should have been covered.
He was trying to argue that because we have fuzzy logic, that therefore the law of identity doesn't underpin all rational thought.
That's not even fuzzy logic. Fuzzy logic denies the LEM, the law of exclusive. Like, they believe that things can be like both true and false. So, I mean, that's what fuzzy logic is. That's the only other logic, by the way, that actually denies the axiomatic positions. Every other logic you have assumes a classical logic.
But I think for what paraconsistent logic or something, or wait, is that when to avoid modal collapse? It's just instances to avoid modal collapse. They assume they kind of ignore the law of non-contradiction or something like that. It's the guy was just total sophism. And he's requesting to come back up, of course. Ugh. I can only handle so much of that crap, though.
I think it was quite stupid. I don't really think he was very literate or he's well versed in this. I would argue. But whatever. No intuitionist logic excludes the LEM. Oh my God.
We couldn't even experience the world without identity, without the ability to organize, categorize our experience. And we couldn't analyze or understand our experience.
Right. On TikTok, there's a lot of Reddit tier here. A lot of Reddit tier people. This one guy was insults and vulgarity, typical theist. How does it make our argument wrong?
Hey, what's good, man?
Welcome. So, do you accept God as your creator, Trap?
Nah, I accept my mom and my dad as my creators.
Do you want to talk to him, Billy? And you can go for it.
You can go for it, P Mars. I kind of did more last time.
So, I take the position you can't rationally deny God. Would you agree or disagree with that?
You say you cannot rationally deny God?
Correct. To deny God would be a universal negative, which is nigh impossible to defend something like that.
Yeah, you're right.
I would say you can agree you can't rationally deny God.
Nah, but like all that religion stuff though,
Uh,
I don't know. I'm an atheist. I don't believe in none of that.
but it seems like your position is like not very rational. It's just you believe what you want, I guess.
Like I just think the Bible is more like an allegory. Like it ain't to be taken literally.
I totally disagree. Well, while some parts are allegory, I mean, I think it's definitely like real. Like I believe in Adam and Eve and Jesus and all that. I believe you're resurrected. I think that's all real. And I don't think you can deny that like rationally. So like, do you believe do you believe we're in a multiverse?
I mean, yeah, possibly. Yeah, it's a good chance.
So it's possible we're in a multiverse, but you don't think it's possible the story in the Bible's true?
Yeah.
Isn't that crazy though? Like
Nah.
how can you think a multiverse is like more tenable than the stories in the Bible?
Guys, I'll deny theism, but like multiverse theory and
No,
string
isn't
theory.
isn't it weird how they'll accept these like scientific miracles like just without as a gospel truth, but then like, oh, how did God make a donkey talk? Wasn't there in the multiverse there could be a talking donkey?
There could be a talking donkey, right? There's a
Hey,
possible world.
me personally, I believe in the theory of like evolution and stuff.
What? The theory of evolution? Yeah, see, I find that hard to believe since it kind of like would go against what the Bible says, where death and suffering would
So
end.
like you really just believe that humans popped up on Earth, like Adam and Eve first, and then we just multiply from that.
Sure. I think that makes more sense than like what's the science story? There's that like
Science story.
rational beings came from an irrational universe. Like that doesn't make sense.
Bro, in the Bible it says God took 7 days to create everything right now. Like 7 days. Come on, 7 days.
Yeah, but God's rational, so it would make sense that like a rational being could create other rational beings. Like how would you explain that rational like so rocks created rational beings?
No.
Like molecules flying.
So
How
if you
are they
let water,
rational?
bro, if you let just water just sit in like, let's say like something, any type of container, you let it sit there for an amount of time, like it will start building like some type of, I don't know, like just micronism in it. It'll just, I don't know, it'll just keep building shit and just keep building and building and building and building and building all types of micronism. And now it just becomes like an ecosystem in that bitch over time. I think it's the same process.
I have no idea what that means.
He's basically saying that microorganisms will evolve if you put a water out, like a container of water out for a long enough time.
I kind of like C.S. Lewis's transcendental argument. I think he like does a simple way of explaining it. C.S. Lewis says, "Oh, you want to go ahead?"
No, you go ahead.
C.S. Lewis says, supposing there was no intelligence behind the universe, no creative mind. In that case, nobody designed my brain for the purpose of thinking. It is merely that when atoms inside my skull happen, for physical or chemical reasons, to arrange themselves in a certain way, this gives me, as a byproduct, the sensation I call thought. But, if so, how can I trust my own thinking to be true? It's like upsetting a milk jug and hoping that the way it splashes itself will give you a map of London. But if I can't trust my own thinking, of course I can't trust the arguments leading to atheism, and therefore have no reason to be an atheist or anything else. Unless I believe in God, I cannot believe in thought. So I can never use thought to disbelieve in God.
True. That's true. Your higher consciousness that is low key God.
I don't think that's what he was trying to say. What he was trying to say is that like the thoughts in our mind, or like our mind, has to be immaterial. So he's talking about like dualism, mind-body dualism,
Yeah,
right?
mind
So like
body.
he's arguing that the mind cannot be reduced to the physical processes of the brain, like neuroscientists believe, because it would lead to where, like, for example, like identity over time would not make sense if it reduced to purely physical and chemical reactions, right?
It would reduce thought to determinism, right? Because it would be the product of like physical processes, which are determined. Therefore, your thought would be determined, which would mean you couldn't like justify it. There'd be no truth. There would just be
Right. There would not be one true belief over a false belief. They would all be equally valid.
Yeah, because like, what does Jim Bob say that one physical process isn't more true than another physical process?
Yeah. One physical effect is not more true or more false than another physical effect.
All right. Okay.
Yeah, like a hurricane is not more true or more false than like a tornado or something.
If I think God is true in my brain, that physical effect isn't like true or false any more than like the person who doesn't think God is true in their brain. That physical effect isn't. You know, it's like there's no way to determine which physical effect is the correct physical effect, the correct arrangement of atoms and chemicals.
Right? And if the mind were immaterial, it's not subject to entropy, so it actually outlives the body.
Hey, all I'm gonna say is I've been so high before my ego died and I met God. That's the one time I really believed in God. Doing drugs. That shit crazy.
All right, man. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for talking about your shroom and LSD experience.
Oh, you know, that reminds me of an art. That's like an argument I make as a joke where I'll be like, you know, how many pharmaceuticals did you have to do before atheism made sense, or something like that, or something. So like sometimes the atheists will bring up when people go to jail. So when a lot of Christians are in jail, right? And they'll cite the statistic that like most people in jail are Christian, and then I'll go, yeah, that's because when you're in jail, you have a lot of time to think, and when you think about things, Christianity makes sense. Okay, man. I make myself laugh. Okay.
No, that was pretty funny. That was pretty funny.
Hey, good morning, guys.
Good morning. So do you accept God as your creator?
No, absolutely not.
Oh my gosh. Do you think you... Well, I claim you can't rationally deny God. Would you agree with that?
Oh, that's your claim. You should support it. You can't prove a negative.
Yes, you can. You can prove a negative.
You can prove... Okay, go ahead.
It's supposed to be you can't prove...
Show me that there's no teapot floating around Mars that's magical and invisible. I mean, you can make any claim you want.
Right, as I said,
be
there
like,
are some negatives. 1 second. There are some negatives that you can prove. For example, when things are dichotomous, like it's either A or not A, you could actually prove the not A in virtue of that. So there are some negatives that you can prove.
What are we talking about? Hey, prove that 2 + 2 = 4, or are we talking about, hey, there's some kind of magic being that created all of the universe?
Any positive...
So when we speak of that, we speak of that quote unquote magical being that you're referencing, we're referring to a dichotomous being that's basically distinct from a world in which that being doesn't exist. So an infinite being versus a finite being, or like two epistemologies we're approaching that are dichotomous.
Okay, so if you're saying that it's either a God exists or a God doesn't exist.
Yes, that's pretty much all I'm saying.
Yeah, so I don't believe your claim because y'all haven't met a burden of proof in any shape or form.
Well, it's either the case that something exists or it doesn't, right?
Yeah, and how do we find that out?
Okay, and we can find it out through rational argumentations for why God would exist and why God would not exist on both sides of the dichotomy.
Yeah, but I'm not claiming a God doesn't exist. I'm just saying y'all haven't met your burden of proof, and I've never seen any good evidence or any good arguments for there some being comes out creator deity.
So we're arguing there's two worldviews, right? The God worldview and like the not God worldview. And the not God worldview cannot account for or explain the transcendental categories or the first principles or the necessary preconditions for knowledge or intelligibility.
Why does it have to?
And in virtue of not, why do you have to account for those things?
Mm-hmm. Do you presuppose that God exists?
We typically, no, I don't.
Oh, interesting. Okay,
right.
then
So we
does
typically
God obey the
provide
laws of
justification.
logic?
I believe the laws of logic are his mind. I'm a conceptualist realist.
I believe. All right, go ahead.
Well, it's not. I don't just believe. I mean, there's an argument for it. Have you ever heard the Lord of Non-Contradiction before? Have you ever heard of that?
No, go ahead.
Topical paper that was written. All right, whatever. So the argument is pretty simple. Atheism or the not God worldview cannot account for first principles or transcendental categories. They cannot explain how and why they exist, and an accounting upon the principle of sufficient reason is necessary in order for your belief to be true. So, like for example, if I were to make an argument, or if I were to have a belief in like laws of logic, right? I got to provide some type of justification upon the PSR for why and how they are the case, and an explanation for like how they're universally applicable. If not, my belief is just going to be trivial. Right. So an atheist cannot do that. They cannot account for those first principles without admitting some type of being that's God. Right.
That's just an assertion on your part. That's literally all that argument comes down to, is that
literally not. Okay.
I believe
How do you
God
account for the
has these
category?
properties, so therefore you have to account for why those properties are there. It's ridiculous.
No.
It's
So I'm
literally
saying the
just an
transcendental
assertion on your
category.
part.
I'm saying the transcendental categories reflect the omni properties that we ascribe to a deity such as God. And the argument
You do
is
that
how
without
can you
showing that a
account
God
for
would
the
have to
transcendental
exist in the first
categories
place.
without a God. How would have possibly account for something like that?
I don't have to.
Yes, you do, because
No,
if you do not
because
account for the transcendental categories, then your worldview would just be skepticism.
that's literally just your opinion. That's like saying if you don't have a
Not
God,
my
then you
opinion.
can't know anything. And that's like saying that's because I believe there's a God, so therefore you're
No,
almost literally
I'm actually
defining your own.
referencing a principle called the principle of sufficient reason. Like when we debate people, we typically have to account for certain things, right? That we believe in. So, okay, if you don't have to justify anything that you believe in, then why do I have to justify God?
Because I'm not making the claim. I'm not making a positive
One.
claim. Y'all are trying to tell me
So transcendental categories don't exist.
you're making a positive claim. I'm not the one
Wait,
saying,
no,
you
I'm
have
not.
to
I'm
believe this
saying I'm
because
making an
X, Y, Z.
economist claim. I'm making an economist claim is that either there is a worldview that has a God or a worldview without a God, and both worldviews respectively have the transcendental categories. But the question is which worldview can better account for those things that are in question. Now, the transcendental categories, right, we can also prove that they're dichotomous in the sense they either are possible or impossible. They either exist or do not exist. So for the sake of discussion, let's say they don't exist. All right, I'm going to provide it's going to be our self-referential contradiction, right?
Go ahead.
Okay, so the argument is very simple. The first principles, right, or the necessary preconditions in order to have knowledge, such as the laws of logic, the self, time, right? All those things are necessary in order to make any proposition about the world, right? So when you make a proposition about what is or what is not, like the sky is blue or whatever, you're assuming the law of identity to be the case, that something is what it is, something's identical to itself. You're also assuming time because there's intervals in the speech that you're using. You're assuming the self, the sense that there's like someone that's knowing this proposition. In order to have knowledge, you need to have a knower. You're also assuming I would argue the induction that the future would be like the past, or the future resembles the past. there's a plethora amount of transcendental categories you assume, such as like universal state of affairs, etc. But basically, if you ever study epistemology, there are presuppositions behind the statements that we make and behind the propositions or knowledge claims that we make. Those presuppositions we call first principles, right? So the question is like, how can one account for or explain these presuppositions and why they're justified? How can you justify what seems to be like presuppositions or things that you hold to prior to making propositions?
Yeah, I only hold one presupposition: the laws of logic.
I think you presuppose time in saying that, though.
Well, yeah, I mean, we exist, so I mean, we're necessarily temporal. We're going to have to exist to say that.
Okay, so you just presuppose temporality when speaking, didn't you?
That infers the laws of logic.
Okay, right. So you assume two different things.
No, I assume
I'm actually arguing that
everything
all the
else
transcendental
does.
categories overlap with each other. They overlap, is the argument. And since they overlap, their overlapping needs to have some type of explanation.
That's literally just okay. How do we not know that things are just the way they are?
So saying that things just are, right? The transcendental categories are the first principles. They just are, and they don't need justification. That's
Properly
like
basic
if you were to
beliefs.
ask me,
The laws of logic is the only thing that's demonstrable and viable.
One second. That's like if you were to ask me, well, like, how do you justify God? And I just reply, well, he just is, and it's just how
literally
the way
what you're
things
doing.
are.
You just don't realize.
No. Our claims are both equally valid because all you're saying is like, I don't have to justify the first principles. They just are. Why can't I just say they just are? It's the same thing with God. If you were to ask me to justify God, and I were to say, well, it's just the way that things are. That's just how they are. That's not an argument.
That's why I asked you if the laws of logic apply to God.
What do you mean they apply to God?
Can God violate the laws of logic?
No.
Then he's bound by the laws of logic. Logic first, God second.
That doesn't follow. I'll tell you why.
Yes, it absolutely does.
So the laws of logic are grounded in God's mind. So basically,
Bullshit,
I replace the
cart before
theory
the
of the
horse.
forms for the thoughts and the concepts in the mind of God.
You just said that God can't violate the laws of logic. If he
There are
cannot
things that
violate the
God
laws of
can't
logic,
do that doesn't restrict his omni property of being all powerful.
that's not what I'm saying. If he is bound
is
by
what
the
you're
laws
saying.
of logic,
That
then
literally
the
is what
laws
you're
of
saying.
logic are higher, quote, quote, than your God.
They're not prior to my God. They are codependent with my God. There's a difference.
Prove that
You know
they
what
came from
codependency
somewhere
is?
other than just existence.
No, they come from his mind is the argument.
That is an assertion on your part with no demonstration of evidence.
No,
You are literally
I
just
could
trying to
justify
define
that. We
your
can
God.
go through that. But 1 second, you're asking about my worldview. You were trying to give an internal critique. So while trying to give an internal critique, don't just say, well, you can't justify that. No, dude, I'm trying to get out of the internal critique that you're positing here that doesn't actually follow. So maybe instead of trying to give an internal critique, you could try to account for the first principles and the transcendental categories that I asked you to account for, instead of being like a theist that, only has blind faith.
No, I told you. I only presuppose the laws of logic, and you
no,
said
no,
your
no.
God
You have blind
is
faith in the transcendental categories, but not blind faith in God. Why is that?
because a God's never been demonstrated. The laws of logic have been because they are reliable, and you have to use them to try and disprove them.
So the justification for why and how the laws of logic exist don't need to actually be justified. Any of the first principles that I assume in order to make my arguments don't need justified. But your God, your belief in God does need to be justified. That is the most arbitrary claim.
Yes, because you agree that your God is bound by the laws of logic.
Okay, that is not an argument that I made. Was it now?
Can God violate the laws of logic?
That's a completely false claim.
Can God violate the laws of logic?
I said no.
Then he is bound by the laws of logic.
That's how his mind thinks. Of course, that's
an assertion on your part. You cannot demonstrate that God exists.
So
you cannot demonstrate that God exists without the laws of logic.
I have to justify one belief, but you don't have to justify your beliefs, is literally completely arbitrary. If you don't have to justify your belief in first principles, I don't have to justify my belief in God. So the point is that you are giving an arbitrary claim, and I argue that we have to justify all my beliefs. Just like how I have to justify my belief in God, you have to justify your belief in transcendental categories and first principles, which are necessary in order to make any proposition about the world. So how about you justify the thing that I've been questioning you this entire time, instead of saying you have no justification for that when you gave me an internal critique of my worldview?
I just said, okay, to prove your God exists, what would you use if not the laws of logic?
Just because I utilize tools in order to like prove something does not mean that like my God is bound by those very things.
Yes, it does. Because
do you know what codependency is?
If you cannot use the tool to prove that your assertion, then what are you even doing? If you can't,
okay, so I don't even think you understand the argument at hand, right? So like, it's very, very simple. When we say that like the laws of logic exist, in that God cannot violate the laws of logic, all we're saying is that the laws of logic are necessary, and you can't conceive without them. So God, who has a mind, which the laws of logic are grounded in, can't conceive of something. You're giving an internal critique, right, of my worldview. But when you give that internal critique,
because you're
not
making
actually
assertions
addressing
that you are
the
not
question at
proving.
hand that I gave you.
You are saying that you are basically defining your God into existence by applying
I'm not
all these
defining my God into
characteristics. Yes, you are.
I'm looking
you are
at
applying
how
all of
two
these
worldviews
characteristics
account
that you
for
cannot
things that
know.
they believe in. That's what I'm looking at.
You
So
are
how do you
applying
account?
all of these
How do you account for
characteristics?
them?
You
Can you
cannot
answer
know them.
that? Can you justify your beliefs or no?
No, I presuppose the laws of logic.
Okay, so you can't justify your beliefs. You just admitted it.
We can't know anything. We can't know anything for 100% certainty.
Okay,
No
yeah,
one
that
can.
is completely. Okay, do you know that?
Yes.
Wait, so you know that you can't know anything for 100% certain? What are you talking about?
Name one thing that you can know for 100% certainty. So go ahead and tell me that you've solved the problem of hard
What I'm giving you is a
solipsism.
rhetorical argument. Do you know what a rhetorical argument is? You're claiming that I cannot know anything for 100% certainty, but when I asked if you knew that, then you said yes. So obviously you can know things for 100% certainty, because you literally said that you can know that you know things. You can't know things for 100% certainty. That's assuming you can know them with 100% certainty. Are you certain that you can't have certainty about your knowledge claims? Do you know that?
What I'm referencing is the fact that we do not have a solution to the problem of hard solipsism. Do you?
Sir, I just referenced a contradiction within the worldview, and you didn't answer it. You
That's
literally
what I'm
just
telling
said
you. The only reason I said yes is because we do not have a problem.
I just gave you an answer that you couldn't actually, like, you just gave a self-referential contradiction. What are you talking about, dude?
No.
You can't know
what
anything
I'm
for 100% certainty, but you can know that, right? There's a thing that you can't
Do
know
you have
for
a solution
100%
to the problem of hard solipsism? You can't know
I
anything for
literally
100%
just did.
certainty.
I just gave you the solution. The solution is that hard solipsism, right, is quite literally a self-referential contradiction, saying that we cannot know anything for 100% certainty, but that you can know that is a contradiction in virtue
then
of it.
you should go collect your Nobel Prize, because you have done something on TikTok
I need a Nobel
that
Prize.
no
Hard
philosopher has
solipsism is
done
considered
for
one of the most
thousands of
irrational
years.
worldviews, even amongst philosophers. What are you talking about? Are you stupid?
No.
Do you have any formal education at all?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, really? Oh, really? The guy that said that he doesn't have to justify his beliefs, yet asked me to justify my belief in God. That guy, you know, that guy really
literally
knows
do
what
the
he's talking
same
about,
by
right?
defining your
That
God
guy's
as the
totally
very
not
principles.
arbitrary. The guy knows what he's talking about. Okay. Right.
Yeah, I don't know why you're getting mad, my guy. You do the same thing,
Oh,
but
I'm
you
sure.
just define
I'm
your
sure.
God
I'm sure,
with the
dude.
properties you're trying to prove.
I'm sure, man.
Hey, can God violate the laws of logic again?
No, he can't.
Oh, wow. Then what does that mean?
That means that his
the
mind
laws
can't
of
conceive
logic-
of a possible world without the laws of logic.
That means that you are giving him properties that you do not know, because if he cannot violate the laws of logic, then the laws of logic come before him. You
That
cannot
doesn't
put
follow.
the cart before the horse.
That doesn't
okay, yeah,
follow.
You're literally just putting the cart before the horse, my guy.
I'll tell you why it doesn't follow. Just because God can't violate the laws of logic, can the laws of logic violate existence?
No.
Okay, why?
Because the laws of logic are descriptive.
Oh.
They are not prescriptive.
Okay, so that means that they already exist. You're
shaped.
assuming they already exist, right?
Yes, because we have to use them to prove that they don't.
Okay, exactly. So we have to use them to prove that they don't. And you literally just said we can't know anything for 100% certainty. But you have to use that in order to say that you don't. Do you not understand the parallelism here that I'm giving you?
Literally, you are making the same presupposition.
This is crazy. Do you not understand that I'm parroting your argument from earlier and using it against you? My argument is very simple. The laws of logic are codependent with metaphysics. They're codependent with existence or with ontological existence, right?
Okay.
Okay. God is codependent with the laws of logic because that's his mind.
Wrong.
That's the conceptual realist position. He can't violate the laws of logic because that's not how he thinks.
You are literally presupposing the God, then mad at me
You're
because I
giving an
presuppose the
internal
laws of
critique
logic.
and you're asking about my position. Do you not understand the response I've been giving you this entire time? Whenever you say, well, does God violate the laws of logic? Okay, therefore he's prior to it. That's called an internal critique. When you're asking me to justify things I believe in, don't give an internal critique because I'm going to justify with my other web of beliefs. Maybe
you're literally just making assertions. You're not justifying it.
Okay,
you are literally just asserting it without justification.
Right, guys, I just want to make the audience well enough and to know this. I gave a dichotomy earlier. The God worldview and the not God worldview. My argument for why the not God worldview is false is that on the not God worldview, you cannot justify or account for first principles, but first principles are necessary for knowledge. So you can't even justify the possibility of knowledge under a not God worldview. This guy just demonstrated and said earlier that he can't justify first principles. You've lost the debate, bro. You've lost the debate.
Because you are making an extra step to say that God is the necessary presupposition for the laws of logic.
I'm not saying he's a necessary presupposition. I'm saying he's a necessary precondition. The precondition for that to be the case.
Okay, demonstrate that. Literally just an assertion on your part.
Okay. So
what are you going to use to demonstrate that?
Okay, my argument is that God is necessary. 1 second. I said that God is necessary in order for there to be first principles. Why is he necessary? Very good question. Maybe if you listen to the disjunctive syllogism I gave you earlier, maybe you would actually understand that. I gave a dichotomy. Why is God necessary for first principles? Okay, very good question. The disjunctive syllogism is that you either have a worldview without the necessity of God for first principles or with the necessity for God for first principles. But the world without the necessity of God for first principles literally leads to what's called a reductio in philosophy. It leads to absurdity. And I just demonstrated that to you because you just told me you can't justify the very thing that I told you is necessary in order to have a not God worldview.
Yes, because I'm honest.
I gave you the dichotomy. It's A or not A, not A, therefore A. God or not God, not God, because that leads to the impossibility of knowledge, therefore God.
That literally is an assertion on your part. You cannot justify that a no God principle would have no knowledge. You cannot justify that.
You literally just admitted that earlier. Okay, can you justify your beliefs? Want to go around this road again?
Yeah. Because we can know things to maximal certainty, not absolute certainty.
Can you justify your beliefs?
Yeah.
Answer the question. Can you justify your beliefs?
Yes, to maximal certainty. Yes, to maximal certainty.
Okay, so now you're going to change it. Now you're going to switch it back. Now you're backpedaling. That's fine.
No, we're not strawmanning here, bud. I said absolute certainty versus maximal certainty.
I understand that, but earlier you just told me earlier that you cannot justify your beliefs.
To maximal certainty.
Okay.
Not
Can
absolute.
You justify with absolute certainty?
Maximal, not absolute. I said nothing can be justified to absolute certainty.
So you're not absolutely certain about anything?
Well, that's an
No.
absolute. That was an absolute.
Are you absolutely certain about that?
As much as we can be, maximally.
Oh, wait. Don't backpedal. So you're not absolutely certain about anything, but you're not absolutely certain about that, right?
To the extent that we can understand
really?
anything.
So tell me how that's
really?
not a self-referential contradiction that I just gave you.
Because the two things are not the same, and to the extent
As
that
I
we
said,
can know
how
anything.
can you be absolutely certain that there is no absolute certainty? You would have to say, no, I'm not absolutely certain that there's not absolute certainty. That would actually be a self-referential contradiction, because your whole argument assumes that you're absolutely certain about there not being absolute certainty. If you're not, then why would you make the claim? You can't justify it.
Because my claim is that we cannot solve the problem of hard solipsism.
Yeah, sure, and I just did. So
No,
earlier,
you didn't.
okay, can you
You're
justify
pretending you
or
did
account for first
by
principles?
defining your
Can you
God
give
with
an
the
account for
principles
first
that fix it.
principles? Can you account for first principles?
I can account for the first principles like the laws of logic by saying that the laws of logic work.
Oh,
You would have to use them to
I
disprove
can
them.
account for how they and why they exist because they work. They work. Okay, that's not an argument. Okay, whether something works or not is already assuming the thing in question. How do you demonstrate that things work? You demonstrate that things work via the laws of logic.
Yep, which you said your God can't violate, but you make the claim that
going
they
back to the
are
internal critique,
presuppositions
which
to him.
doesn't work. That's fine.
Again, yeah, because you are literally just defining your God as something co-equal, or
I'm
however
literally
you
not
phrased it.
defining my God into existence.
Yes, you
I
are.
told you once.
What would you use to define your
I
God?
gave you an economist view, and you proved my point earlier. When I asked if you could justify and account for first principles, you were like, "No, I can't." Okay, then why are you asking me to justify the existence of God or one belief that I have, but you
Because
won't
of the
justify the
positive
belief that
statement
you
on
have? It
this
seems
screen.
arbitrary.
God
How is it not
exists.
arbitrary?
God exists. Your statement on the screen right now, you have the burden of proof, and you have not met it.
Okay, 1 second. That's PMARS. PMARS has the banner, God exists. Up
I
at
don't
his
give a
actual-
shit. Are you in here with
Debate-
this live?
Okay, 1 second. And debate
Then
is
fuck
whether
off.
God exists or not. So maybe if you could answer the very question that I gave you in the economy that I gave you in the distruct that I gave you, which you never answered.
No,
Because
the
earlier
original
I
question
asked-
was, do I
1
believe
second,
that a
1
God
second.
is the...
Earlier I demonstrated that you're being completely arbitrary. You could say, I don't have to justify anything that I believe in, but when I ask you, right, when I believe in God, you're expecting me to justify it. Why the double standard?
Because I'm not the one making the positive claim here.
But you made the positive claim that first principles exist. That's you literally did. The question is over first principles and their necessity, or how and why they exist. That's the question.
The question was in response to whether or not I believe that a God, or however y'all phrased it, created all of existence.
That's not what it was. That's not true. That's a straw man. I'll chill out. But the argument that I was presenting,
literally just said whatever
all right.
it was. It was in response to y'all question, which you didn't
go
provide
ahead and speak.
evidence for.
Yeah, so the earlier I was demonstrating that you have a double standard because I asked you, can you justify the belief in first principles and transcendental categories? And when I asked you that, you said no. Okay, guess what? If you don't have to justify what you believe in, I don't have to justify what I believe in. That is completely arbitrary. What my position is that we should justify things that we believe in. So you should justify and account for the first principles that you believe in, just like I should justify and account for God, which I believe in. So maybe, just maybe, you could justify the very thing that's in question, which is necessary in order to have knowledge or a justified true belief or any proposition about the world.
See, you were almost
If you can
there.
justify that without the existence of God, I would love to see it. Can you show me that?
You
Go ahead.
literally were almost there. You started off so good, but then you were like, but I believe you have to justify, when we can both start at the first principles of the laws of logic are the only thing that we know to be can be even remotely used to justify anything else. But you go, but no, my God is before that. So then we start from there. And one
That's
God is
not my
also before
argument.
that, and I'm going to give him
That's not
all
my
of these
argument.
special properties. That is 100%
That's not what my
your
argument is.
argument.
I'm starting from the first principles and asking, how do you account for that? That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying, okay, God's above it now. That's not my argument. I'm saying we observe these metaphysical things. We observe the metaphysical first principles, which are universally applicable. They're necessary in all possible worlds, meaning that if the universe were not to exist, they would still exist in virtue of the universe not existing. They're applicable across all possible worlds that you could have. Okay? So those things that are timeless, unchanging, universally applicable, invariant, how can you account for those very things under a worldview without the metaphysical triumny properties of God? You cannot, and that's the issue. You can't
That is
justify
literally-
them, and you admitted earlier that you can't.
That is literally just special pleading on your part, because you are
All
like,
right, yeah,
I
yeah.
have these special magical properties that you have to account for. But whenever I ask you, okay, how do you know that those exist? You are like, oh, I don't have to know. It's just God, and it's
How
there,
do you
and
know
I'm
the
just
transcendental
defining that
categories
way.
exist? We already assume they exist. You literally just said earlier and agreed with me earlier that first principles exist. That's literally what you claim as well.
So we are both assuming the validity of the laws of logic, correct?
Yeah, we're both believing in them. Yes.
And does your God come before or after the laws of logic as the baseline?
I believe that God exists with laws of logic in his mind.
Special pleading. You cannot prove that. You cannot
Okay,
prove that
one
using
second.
the very laws that you say are valid.
Vendetta, do you understand? The way in which I am proving that is by proving the dichotomy, it does exist, and since the dichotomy exists, if one is false, in virtue of one being false, the other has to be true. So when I prove that your world leads to a
absolutely not.
reduction, that's what a dichotomy is.
No,
That's literally what a
you have a
dichotomy is.
false. That is literally a false dichotomy that you are trying to switch
How is
to.
it a false dichotomy? Tell me.
Because you are saying that if I can I can disprove with an assertion, then that means that my assertion is true. Wrong.
No.
You are
that's
saying
not what
that
said.
that the God is the justification, therefore your version is wrong. And that's bullshit. Because you would
That's
have to
not true.
prove that God exists in the first place to make that claim. Show
Okay.
me a universe
Can
that
the
that
laws
is
of logic
uncreated
exist in
versus
a
this one that's
vacuum?
created.
Can the laws
Yes.
of logic exist in a vacuum?
Yes.
Okay. That is the most stupidest, most dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. How can they exist in a vacuum?
Because you literally just said earlier the laws of logic would exist with no universe.
1 second. That doesn't follow. When I say the laws of logic exist in a vacuum, what I'm saying is that they don't exist with anything with it. That's the argument, is that when something is in a vacuum, it's isolated from any type of relation to anything else at all. And I'm saying the laws of logic cannot exist in a vacuum. They must exist with something. That's literally the argument.
Says what? The prior laws of logic that say that?
No, because they have intentionality behind them. What are you talking about?
They have intentionality behind them?
Do you know what intentionality is? Intentionality, right? The laws of logic, they're propositions. They're about something. They're about the state of affairs.
They have a
They're
function.
about existence.
Purpose, function, yeah.
Okay.
They have telos.
When you said vacuum earlier, I thought you were referencing actual physical space vacuum. But yeah,
That's no.
yeah. Then be more clear. Then.
So they can't exist in a vacuum. Therefore, they require some type of justification. That's the argument.
No,
Oh my God.
because that implies that they would have a purpose when they are descriptive, not prescriptive.
Okay, so first principles are not prescriptive.
They are descriptive.
Okay, so if they are not prescriptive but descriptive, those are both dichotomous, by the way. Well, let's assume they're descriptive for the sake of the conversation. If they were descriptive and not prescriptive, then you saying that they're necessary in order to have knowledge is the most stupidest claim ever, because we can just construct them differently.
No, because they would not work. You have to use them to disprove them.
Okay, wait. Can you repeat that again for me?
You have to use the laws of logic if you were attempting to disprove them.
Okay, so do you know that actually proves that they're prescriptive, right?
Descriptive versus prescriptive versus what we are trying to do.
1
with
second. No. Don't get out of this now. Your argument is arguing for them being prescriptive. Do you understand that's an argument that theists give to prove the laws of logic are prescriptive? Is that in order to deny them, you have to assume them to be the case, so they're prescriptive before you deny anything? That's actually a theist argument to prove they're prescriptive. Why are you using an argument for them being prescriptive, i.e. retorsion, it's the argument that Aristotle gave, in order to try and prove that they're descriptive? Do you not understand that that's illogical? It's going against your own position?
No, because in no way, in shape or form, do I use them to prove that some kind of deity is prior to them.
Okay, Jesus
I do
Christ.
not make the assertion.
Can you actually deal with the question that I asked you?
No, I'm not going to let you get out of the burden of proof.
You said the laws of logic are descriptive. Okay, why? Okay, then my question was, if they were only descriptive, then you could construct them differently to violate and exclude the rest of the classical laws of logic. But you just said, in order to deny them, you have to assume them to be the case. Do you not understand that the argument from retorsion is trying to prove that they're prescriptive and not descriptive? So in order to prove that they're descriptive, you gave an argument for why they're prescriptive. Do you not understand how that's an issue?
Is a, not a, or
Jesus Christ.
Is that true in all conditions?
P-Mars.
Yeah, I'm here.
I would request for Vendetta to be kicked off. I think he's out of his league.
Still haven't met your burden of proof. Still asserting things without evidence.
In every respect, please get the hell out of here. Please go.
Cry more.
Yeah, dude, I'm the one crying, but you don't have to justify what you believe in. That's fine.
And just like you don't have to justify why you give your God your properties, you just say they're necessary.
Right. So you said
they're
that
necessary.
you don't have to justify things you believe in.
And
That's
you said I don't
arbitrary.
have to justify. You say the same thing. I don't have to justify why my God is necessary.
I don't.
Yes, you do.
Oh
you just define it.
Oh
you just literally define him with the properties you say he has.
I believe. 1 second, sir. I said earlier that we should all justify our beliefs. But this guy was like, no, we don't. Okay, whatever.
I don't know what the descriptive, prescriptive thing. Do you mean is he saying discovered or created? I don't think is that the right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So when we say the laws of logic are descriptive, what you're saying is that they're constructed by humans, right? So they're contingent upon human minds to construct them the way that they are. And they usually say it's through evolution or something, right? But the issue is that the prescriptive worldview is that they're prior to reasoning itself.
The way I understand, so descriptive is what is, prescriptive is what ought to be. So, I mean, the laws of logic do describe what is, but they're also prescriptive because there's oughts entailed.
No. I understand what you're saying. They're descriptive in one sense of the terminology of descriptive. They describe existence itself, right, and how it works.
I'm confusing. There's a different sense of the word descriptive,
right? But all we're saying is it constructed by humans or is it necessary for existence itself? That's the argument.
Yeah, is it discovered or created?
Right.
I'm saying it was created.
Right. He argued that it was created by humans, but he gave an argument that's literally that theists use to prove that it's prescriptive, which is so stupid.
I think he did make a mistake earlier though, where I think he said we prove God with a rational argument.
All right. I just don't know how he doesn't notice the double standard, right? I believe we should all justify each of our beliefs respectively. This guy was well, I don't have to justify any of my beliefs and the things that I believe in, such as first principles that are necessary for knowledge, but you have to justify your God. I mean, that seems completely arbitrary. Okay.
Because we're comparing models of reality. So they have to defend their model of reality. We have to defend our model of reality. But they can't defend the model of reality, so they try to smuggle it in as if it's the default position. We all know that's what they're doing.
I kind of hogged the mic there. You can go next with whatever atheist comes up next.
No, that's fine. I don't mind taking a break because I talk a lot. So, like, do you I think you said that we prove God with a rational argument, but that would go against what Russ Mannion said, where he said God is proven not as the conclusion of a rational or empirical theistic argument, but as the very ground of argument itself. It is with the surrender to God's view of himself, the world, ourselves, that one can articulate coherent theory of knowledge. So God's revelation is not validated by some autonomous epistemology. Rather, our epistemology is validated by the revelation of God and the story contained in that revelation. So, like, I would say, like, well, then he goes to say that God's revelation is self-authenticating because by it, everything else is authenticating. So, like, P1 of the tag is that God has revealed himself, and it's like a self-authenticating. We're arguing God is our self-authenticating proposition. Because, like, any system is going to need a self-authenticating proposition, i.e., an ultimate authority of truth. You see what I'm saying?
Well, I don't disagree. So, like, when in the Mannion paper that you cited, whenever Mannion says that, he's responding to, like, other theistic arguments for God, like Aquinas's ways. So, like, his argument is that we don't just... Yeah, he's arguing against what we call the peripatetic axiom, which is that knowledge comes from sensory experience, and from sensory experience we like reason to God or something. So my argument is that God can be justified out of his necessity, which literally is the argument that Mannion makes. But Mannion is not saying that we don't like justify the existence of God. That's not what he's saying there.
Well, yeah. Well, I would say, like, we're basically arguing that. So traditionally, we know things either through like sense data or logic or reason or something. But we're saying that those lead to basically disaster, absurdity. Where if all we had to rely on was our knowledge from like science and philosophy, then science and philosophy themselves would be impossible. And we need a foundation. We need another type of knowledge that comes from God to even have like empirical proof or rational proof.
Right.
We're arguing that there's this like third type of knowledge, revelational knowledge, that's necessary to make sense of our experience, essentially.
Right, and I understand that. Right, I understand the argument there. Like, we're saying that revelation acts as a way to get out of skepticism.
Yeah.
I don't know what revelation acts as. It's like a bridge between to get out of skepticism, right?
Yes.
Because if you just rely upon your own reasoning, well, you know where that gets you.
And there'd be like and then Darth likes to argue the metaphysical aspect of it, whereas like
ground of all being.
Well, for the law of identity to be true, there has to be something like that's actual, because like the law of identity is an abstraction, which means it doesn't stand in causal relations with the world, so it can't.
Right, it's non-causal.
Yeah, it doesn't cause. So, like, what would cause it to be true? Example, like, you have an apple. Well, presumably, if there was nothing limiting the properties of the apple, it could just have an infinite random amount of properties. Like, for example, weight. There's an infinite amount of numbers it could weigh. So, for anything to have like a limit to its property set, its identity, it needs to have something that limits its property set. If there's I think it's just like it's a tautology, right? Sometimes they'll push back where I go, if there's no limit to the states of existence, then the states of existence of the entity has no limit. And they'll go, no, but it's like, that's just a tautology. How do you disagree with that? So that we can also argue God in like a metaphysical sense, is that something needs to cause logic to be true, whereas like God limits the identity, the properties of all the like particulars.
I think the argument actually kind of works like we understand my argument earlier, like the laws of logic have aboutness to them, like they're about things. And my argument was simply that like that requires a universal mind, because aboutness is a conceptual item. It's a mental item, right? Or intentionality.
Well, yeah, when they say that logic is a human construct, then that just destroys the universality of it right there.
Right. It when it's a necessary truth, right? That's an issue.
Which means we could just go like, well, I'm just gonna change logic now for this debate to prove God. So this logic I invented proves God, therefore God.
Right. This logic I just invented proves God. Right. My first laws of logic is called the law of the law of having God, and God is, and it's necessary
The principle
for everything.
of Christianity.
I'm gonna define my God into that's defining God into.
Yeah, well, that's what they. I can't hear you. I don't know if you're talking still. But that's what they basically do is they make themselves God because they make themselves the arbiter of what's true and what's good. So we all know what they're doing.
Right.
That's why it's difficult for us to be like, yo, there's actually a God and he's real because they've made themselves God. So think about like if you think you're God and then someone comes up to and is like, hey, you're not God. It's like you're going to be like, screw that. I am God. You know what I mean? That's kind of what's going on here in like an ego. It's like an ego battle, like a pride thing.
I think it's a moral issue. That's kind of my view. It's a moral issue.
The pride, right? Like it's what Adam and Eve, they thought they were autonomous. They could make decisions for themselves. They didn't need God. They could live independent of God. So we were separated from God, but now we have a relationship open to God through Christ. So Jesus.
Yeah, what is the viewer points? What is it? Viewer points. What is that?
I think that's like it adds up as money on your account or something. You can like link you can link your TikTok account to PayPal and then like it'll send you money. Or you can use the money to give to other people on TikTok. I think I don't really know a lot about it. I like to do the debates. And a lot of the like gifting and all that stuff is kind of mystery. A lot of this TikTok stuff is still a mystery to me. I'm like a boomer on this thing.
Yeah, same here. You did get the most popular live. That's interesting on the debate section.
Oh, really? Sweet.
Yeah, you do. You got the top donors, top viewer.
Well, it's like early in the morning, so.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, I think we got a good argument. I don't know. The atheists are starting to not show up as much, though. I think they're getting scared.
Did you clip that discussion with that one atheist guy?
Did I kick him? You asked me to kick him, so it was kind of just going in circles. Like he wasn't.
I think some of the arguments there would have been like good for clips, but yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I haven't really been doing clips. What I've been doing now is I've just like been posting the whole video to YouTube. I made like an account there, so you can like you can download your live off TikTok, and then I can post the whole live. But then again, it's like they're so long. People kind of like clips now. Clips are like the shorts or what's. I should probably still do that. I don't know. I guess get lazy. I need like an editor. But then I'd have to pay them and I don't make any money off of it, so
I can edit stuff. I don't need to be paid.
Yeah, I need like a jib.
A jib? Oh, I need jib, bro.
He does a good job with the Jay Dyer videos.
I know he does. I need jib, bro. He's been doing pretty good, but
yeah, you still talk to him?
He's not online as much.
Yeah.
Yeah, personal stuff, but
it's unfortunate. I enjoy his company, so
yeah, same man, same here. He was the best at debating too. I would argue he was one of the best.
He's pretty good. Yeah, I gotta say Darth's the best, of course, because like otherwise.
Okay, right. I know you do. I'm saying he's one of.
If I don't.
He's gonna disown
I'm
you.
just kidding, by the way. I'm just kidding.
He's gonna disown you, P Mars. Don't you dare.
Surprised he hasn't already. So I make some inappropriate jokes he wouldn't like. So
Really? Did you make him mad or something?
I think if he's heard some of the things I've said, I don't know if everything's gotten back to him. But people are always trying to like tell me that, oh, Dar's so bully and he's a big jerk and he's mean, so you shouldn't be his friend. He's not a Christian and stuff like that. And then people will tell Darth that like they like want Darth to not have any friends, so there's these people are deranged.
They'll tell Darth that you're doing something that you're not, right?
Or they'll just like if they find out something about me they think Darth won't like, they'll run and tell Darth. They try, yeah. So like I made a joke about Darth being old or something, and then someone went like told Darth like, Pete's making fun of you behind your back. But Darth said like, well, I know like if he's doing it, he's in like good faith, like he's just joking around. So he said he doesn't care. So
right, except not Fox. Then he'll believe.
No, I think the thing with not Fox had to do with there's someone was like one of the people that harasses him. Not Fox wouldn't ban from the room or something. So basically. Like the big thing with Darth is you just gotta ban who he wants banned, and then he'll be cool with you. So
yeah,
and be like humble. Don't act like you're like better than him. He doesn't like that. That's about it.
I mean, yeah, every single debate, people always act high and mighty.
But think about all like the ignorant people we've dealt with. Like he's been doing this longer, so it's like there's so little patience to just listen to the kind of the crap people say that really don't know what they're talking about. You know, that's understandable because I'll sit here and give people a chance to talk, but ultimately they're just yapping, and he just cuts through a lot of the yap and gets to the point. Like, you know, all the guys we were talking to, they all were constantly dancing around the issue, weren't they? And yapping. And Darth, like, just cuts through all that crap and gets straight to the point.
I see. Yeah. Me, when it comes to lives, I think I'm a little bit more tolerant of, like, the ignorant people because it just shows, like, the stupidity of the people that's actually holding this position.
Yeah, you're seeing like, you and me are more like an educational approach where we're trying to like edify, where Darth is just like straight up debating, like he's not worried about edification.
Right. Yeah, that's pretty much how it is.
I thought funny. Someone said he's like speed running precept. I thought that was a funny way to put it.
Speed running.
Yeah, he kind of is. Well, sometimes some people he'll have more patience with, and he'll talk to them. But like, if someone's kind of like a jerk, you know, he'll just like speed run precept, show they're absurd, kick them. It's really easy to show them like, you know, you ask a few questions and they quickly devolve into like dodging, and they can't. You know, they never really want to answer these questions because they can't.
Right, but I think really. I mostly engage with people. Either one, I'm educating, or two, which is the most likely, is towards people like the audience, right? Mm-hmm. Usually, I'm just trying to.
Right.
The stupidity of their worldview.
Yeah, that's what I like. I kind of like. I guess it's against the rules on TikTok to humiliate people, but. I'm kind of like maybe I'm not humiliating them, but they humiliate themselves by just talking and saying like the things they say, I guess. But that's kind of like the goal, is just to show that, like, yeah, that's what I want to do, is show that
Right.
they're just silly. They're not being rational. They're being emotional.
Yeah. Like that guy earlier totally humiliated himself.
But unfortunately,
Good morning, Dre.
the tag is such a strong argument we're not getting. And look, we got this sophist in the chat. PMARS, you get crushed every day. You leave your safe space. Okay.
I mean, PMARS kind of really doesn't ban people often just for disagreeing. He deals with their BS before he bans them. So.
I don't really yeah, there's very few people like that guy. I kind of don't want to talk to that starfish guy, like, because I banned him because he's just like, I've talked to him for like a year and he's just really kind of, it's just not worth talking to him. It's after some point, like. Yeah, the problem with tag is it's too strong of an argument and the people lose every time, so like no one wants to debate me now. Dude, you don't. This starfish guy. Have you ever seen the debate? I don't know if you saw a debate. Jay Dyer versus a guy named Detroyer. And Detroyer, Jay Dyer called Detroyer out on doing an ad hoc rescue fallacy. When they, when they talk about a worldview that's not their worldview. Well, what about this hypothetical worldview? And Jay Dyer pointed out that's an ad hoc rescue fallacy. You have to argue like what you actually believe when we're doing the transcendental argument.
But this then, it's like, okay, so you're abandoning your position. Okay, do you understand that?
They're being arbitrary is what they're doing. And Jay Dyer will say you can't be arbitrary. That's like one of the rules of a debate, is you can't be arbitrary. And so Starfish tried to argue that Jay Dyer was wrong and it wasn't an ad hoc rescue fallacy and that it was a valid move in the debate and all that. See, he's still arguing to this day in the chat. See, that's not an ad hoc rescue fallacy.
Wait. So, Starfish, do you think it's valid for me to say, okay, what if I can just hold to this position in the middle of a debate between our position? You understand? I'm abandoning my own position right now, right?
Like, what if there's a worldview where there's just one molecule that would be intelligible or something like that? Like, what about the hypothetical one molecule worldview or something? It's just like garbage. It's an ad hoc rescue.
The issue is that there's no worldview in which the Christian God cannot exist, right? So, like, the argument that Jay Dyer made is that there's a limited amount of worldviews that we can refer to, or starting points. So you got like monism, dualism, pantheism.
I think the issue is that, like, with Van Til, he'll say that when we're arguing the transcendental argument, we're arguing as opposed to abstractly or formally, where we talk about hypotheticals and guesses, we're arguing concretely, which means we're arguing about our actual position. It doesn't make sense to talk about a hypothetical worldview because your own worldview would falsify that worldview. So it's just it's like goofy to even. It's like it shows they don't understand the argument when they talk about hypothetical worldviews. It is an ad hoc rescue fallacy. But see, look at that. We're arguing concretely. Laugh my ass off. They don't understand the like meta level. They think they want to bring everything to like the normative level.
Hey, what's up, guys?
What's up, Gabriel?
So it's the exact same thing you guys are talking about. So I was debating a guy yesterday about this, that that God had to necessarily be the case, right? And he played the same type of tactic where he's like, well, I can just provide a different worldview where it shows it's not necessarily the case. And then he's like, but even if I failed in showing you that this worldview could work, you're still not proving that it's necessarily, because you'd have to write down every possible worldview. You'd have to like make a list of like 1 trillion worldviews and refute it. And then that's not possible.
It's turning the argument into an inductive survey, which the argument's not an inductive survey. The idea is that a worldview falsifies other worldviews. So in virtue of the fact that the Christian worldview like answers the transcendental challenge, that would falsify other worldviews necessarily, because there can only be one like transcendental reality. There can only be one metaphysical reality.
Well, so this guy mentions Dyer, and he's like, well, Dyer's response was he believes he could actually, like, if he had enough lifespan, he could write down every possible worldview
I agree with Jay
and then
Dyer.
refute it. Yeah.
I have a paper that I wrote, and it's called "Why Everybody Else Is Wrong But Me." So like, okay, so listen. So you don't need to refute an infinite amount of worldviews because there's only a few limited number of worldviews, right? There's a monad, dyad, triad, tetrads, monism, dualism, panentheism, pantheism, right? And that covers pretty much every single religion.
Anti-realism.
Right, and anti-realism, right? That covers every religion possible pretty much, you know what I'm saying? So since there's a limited number of worldviews, like there's a refutation for every single one of those limited number of worldviews. Like pantheism, monism, dualism, panentheism, they all lead to absurdity. A monad leads to absurdity. Tetrads, triads, they all lead to absurdity. Anti-realism.
So what's the justification that there's a finite number of worldviews?
There's a finite so this goes into like
a finite amount of starting points.
Yeah, starting points in order to justify.
When it comes to morals, you're either like a moral realist or a moral anti-realist, and that's going to inform a large part of your worldview, or like your epistemology. What's your epistemology, or your ontology? There's only certain starting point beliefs that affect the larger, like the flows from.
I mean, I would agree. Like if we make like a microcosm of the discussion, right? You can address like pretty much everything, but I don't know how I would show that it's not infinite though. Like
I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why. So
like intuitively, I would think it's finite, right? But how do we justify that?
The transcendental categories, right, have specific properties, right? So specific properties require specific justification for said properties. It's, for example, you can't commit a category error when justifying something. If I were to justify the existence of a wooden stool by mentioning like steel, that would be a category error. They're two different materials, right? So if I were to justify metaphysical things with physical things, that would also be a category error, right? So let's say, for example, a Muslim, right, is trying to account for the law of non-contradiction with their starting point, which literally includes a contradiction. That wouldn't make sense. So I would really recommend some of Jay Dyer's lives that I can send you in DMs.
You could, I think you could actually like break it down, like what I read of Bonson, into like, so the worldview is either Christian or non-Christian. Now that will encompass all worldviews, right? And you can say all non-Christian worldviews fail because they don't have a single unifying principle with causal powers that would be like necessary to explain anything. So only Christians have a single unifying principle with causal powers, and that will just falsify. That would actually falsify all non-Christian worldviews.
So like even in that last discussion, when you were saying that the laws of logic are like codependent with God, or they're with him, are you saying that in like a modal sense? Like every possible universe you can conceptualize God, they're there? Like
no, that's not what he's saying. He's saying that the Christian worldview is defined as a necessary starting point.
What you were saying.
He was asking you about when you were saying that like logic is a reflection of the mind of God.
Oh, so
like you used the word codependent. Like what did you mean by codependent?
That it exists with God as in his mind.
Are they finite?
They're not well, finite, I would argue.
So this is kind of like this is kind of getting to like the what my real like the what's in principle my question. So like if
like Jay Dyer, he holds to the idea that laws of logic are created, but they're in the logi, right? But I would respectfully disagree.
Yeah, I don't think that makes sense. So like this is what I'm saying. So if because things like love, morality, logic, in some when we say they're reflective, in some sense they're going to be like intrinsic of God, right? Like they're showing
Like they reflect his omni properties, right?
right. So then how could if we're going to talk about like first principles and the laws of logic, I don't see a why would they be a limited reflection, right? Wouldn't the laws of logic in some sense be an infinite reflection of logic?
So like, does logic reflect anything physical?
No, forget. Yeah, I mean, no, forget physical. We're
So
just,
we can tell that the laws of logic wouldn't reflect something that's contradictory, right?
no, like I'm not even talking about our world, bro. I'm talking about the universe.
No. I know that, but I'm
Yeah.
saying is that the laws of logic would not reflect something contradictory, would they?
No, but they also wouldn't be
No.
exhaustive. That's the point of the question. So I'm asking like, is there an exhaustive list of logic? Because if there isn't, then I don't know how we could conceptualize every possible worldview written down. Like that's kind of
As I said, when somebody says every possible worldview, they're thinking of like, oh, what if I just add this little itty bitty proposition that's not in your worldview? Like, I don't think they understand that the tag argument is a comparison of starting points or worldviews that can account for first principles specifically. So the first principles require specific explanations, and we can justify that via the idea of like category errors, right? So when you say the laws of logic, or for example, when an atheist were to say the law, like there's a unlimited number of worldviews.
They'll say there's
the issue
infinite
that I
starting
would
points, bro. They'll say there's infinite categories, infinite starting points.
but I'm telling you that that's
Not
stupid. If there,
infinite
okay,
starting
Gabriel, if there was an infinite amount of starting points, then steel would be acceptable. Matter would be acceptable as a justification for the laws of logic. Do you understand that?
I mean,
So
I agree. Like, I'm not saying that there's not things you couldn't say it's not. I'm saying
okay,
that
so if there are things that you can negate, so specific worldviews that you can negate, there's a finite amount of them. Do you understand that? If you can negate certain worldviews, then there's a finite amount. So if I can negate monism, like, can a contradictory worldview account for and explain laws of non-contradiction? No, it can't. Right? Just like if Islam includes contradictions within their own worldview, just like if Judaism contains contradictions within their worldview, just like if you hold to a monist, dualist, pantheist worldview, or Spinozan worldview, they all lead to contradictions.
So I'm trying to lay this out in terms of like an equation. So like if I say A is more than or equal to B, and so B can't be a negative number, right? But B can be a positive number, and there's an infinite amount of positive numbers, but there's definitely wrong numbers, right? So in the same way, what if they argue like there can be infinite starting points, infinite worldviews you'd have to exhaustively refute. There's definitely ones you can that are obviously false, but that doesn't follow that there can't be an infinite number that are correct.
As I said, there cannot be an infinite amount of starting points because you can negate some starting points. Do you understand that that's not the same as a numerical equation?
You have to show me why. I don't see why not.
Okay, so the argument's very simple. There's an infinite set of apples. Just imagine that, an infinite set of apples. Now, here's my argument. Some apples don't exist. Okay, then there's a finite set of apples. Because it's not infinite. An infinite set doesn't have a negative of their existence. For example, that's like I were to say, some of God exists, but the rest of God doesn't. No, he's infinite. Some apples exist, other apples don't. These apples don't, these apples do. How is it not finite? How can you have an infinite amount of a limited infinite amount of apples? Do you understand that? You can't have a limited, infinite amount of something. Okay? You can have a limited, finite amount of something, not a limited, infinite amount of something. That literally makes no sense. Limited in the sense that it has some of its properties negated or some of its existence
Right, so it'd have to be the same kind of apple. It couldn't be a different kind of apple.
Yeah, if it's the same
Like if you
kind
say
of
that
apple.
there's an infinite amount of red apples, but there's definitely not any amount of green apples.
Well, listen, when we say we're talking about worldviews, right, and starting points. There is a limited amount
I'm really talking
of
about the
starting
logic
points
itself, like the first principles that are intrinsic to God, and if they're finite. If they're finite, then if they're finite, your world, what you're saying makes sense. If they're infinite, it doesn't make sense. If they're finite,
No,
in some
it
sense, you're
doesn't.
saying
It
God
doesn't.
is
I'll tell you
finite.
why. So, although the transcendental categories are accounted for by infinite
By the way,
being,
bro, I agree with you. I'm just trying to give you a little pushback just to see how you would answer this stuff. So I hope it's not. You know what I mean?
All right. Yeah, it's okay. First principles are finite. There's a limited number of them. Okay,
How do
they're
you know that?
finite in that sense of a limited number.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure that that's the thing in question. Everything after that, I agree with you. But what's in question
One
is
second.
how do you know
So,
there's limited first principles? If first principles are reflective of an infinite God, that would mean God is finite.
okay, I'll tell you why. So when we say that there's a difference between saying transcendental categories are finite and saying that transcendental categories have a limited number of them.
But I'm asking you about God, bro. I'm not asking you about the categories. I'm asking you if God is infinite and it's reflective of Him, how can you say first principles are limited?
I would say they're limited in quantity, is the
So
argument.
God has quantity?
Well, there's numerical numbers ascribed to God's
God
person.
has
So yeah,
numerical quantity within His nature?
not quantitative as humans are, but yeah.
And then why use that kind of language? Then God is not numerical. So God either
Is God three persons?
God is either is numerical or He's not numerical.
Is He three persons?
Well, I think that's a different category. No, if you're talking
really.
about,
Okay.
I
See,
can explain.
do you get my
why.
argument though? It's a different category.
I can explain. Yeah, no, but you can't equate logic to the persons, bro.
As I said, the transcendental categories in some way reflect God. In other ways, they don't, in the sense that they're dependent on God. Do you understand? It's like asking, like, okay, let me give you an example,
I don't
Gabriel.
think it's appropriate to equate the
Let me give you
category
let me give you an example.
with
Are
logic.
the first principles dependent upon God?
I don't believe they're dependent. I believe they're intrinsic. They're reflective.
Okay, as I said, are they dependent upon God in the sense that if God didn't exist, would they still exist?
No, I think they're modal.
Right. But the issue is that they have a different type of necessity. There is derivative necessity and intrinsic necessity. So the argument that we're making is that they are derivative in virtue of God's existence. Oh, wow, they're dependent? How can they reflect the nature of God if they're dependent? That's not what we mean. We describe God as this. They have some properties that could be ascribed to our God. They're reflective of the existence of our God, or what we call our God. That's kind of the argument.
Yeah, but why are they numerical, bro? I don't disagree with that point.
I'm saying that there's a limited amount of transcendental categories because, okay, I'll tell you why. The transcendental categories are necessary preconditions for knowledge. Can the necessary precondition of knowledge be like something that's contingent or something that is, how I would argue this, something that is material? They can't, right? So there's a limited number of them in virtue of there being a negation of some of what could possibly be the case. Anyways, people are wanting to get up and speak, so.
No, that's cool, bro. I appreciate it.
I would really want you to DM me. I could send you some Dyer's Lives where he explains all these questions.
Yeah, man. No, for sure. I was just trying to pick your brain a little bit. If you get hit with this, get hit with that. I mean, this stuff is always fun to talk about.
All right. P. Mars, can you let somebody else up?
Yeah, there's no one else really requesting. I thought maybe I'll shut her down. I guess we're not really getting a lot of atheists.
Yeah, there's just like the atheists are all in the chat saying, let people up. Yet they're not requesting. Request if you want to get up here.
The one guy that did request was that guy I told him I didn't want to talk to him anymore. So I was going to let you talk to him, but you've talked to him on Discord. It's what does he go by the name on Discord? Like not cool guy Jeff. I don't know. He changes his name.
Oh my God, is that Kiki? Is Kiki not cool guy Jeff? There's no way.
It was what was his name? Was
Sunflower?
Starfish.
Starfish. Oh, terrible. That guy's absolutely terrible.
Terrible. I asked him, I was just like, leave me alone, and he won't. He'll like his wife and his baby will go to church, and he'll stay at home and tell people God doesn't exist. Like,
wait, crazy. What?
Yeah, his wife is a Christian. He told us about how his wife was at church with his daughter. He's like sitting online telling people Christianity is false while his wife is praying to God. So kind of a deranged
person. Made a mistake. TVH.
Yeah. Oh. Anyways, yeah, God is real. Yeah, no one's really like trying to come up here and debate, so I think I might end it down. Maybe I'll go live later. Thanks for coming.
All right, bro.
No, you're always welcome.
DM me when you go live.
Yeah, okay. If you come up, I'll let you. You can kind of, because I talk a lot. So if you want to come on, you can, kind of take center stage or whatever if you want. Unless you do it. Unless you do it too much, and then I'll tell you to stop. But
yeah, sure.
All right. Thanks, everyone. God bless.